Hi everyone, welcome along to the annual Expert Tuition Paper One live Q&A. Thank you very much for turning up. I want to start off. Firstly, thank you very much for all of you guys who sent in questions. I have been inundated with questions via email, Instagram, TikTok, etc. I actually want to begin with the question that I get more often than any other every single year, and especially this year. Hi everyone, welcome along to the annual Expert. Let me mute myself. Cool. Right. So give me a second. Actually, I think the speaker's list is open. There we go. All right. So basically the most common question that I have been getting, and I get every single year, is what do I predict will come up in the paper? And I want to start off by breaking some hearts because I apologize in advance. I do not believe in predicting papers. I think that it's a very silly thing to do. The truth is that Edexcel exam papers are very repetitive, as I will hopefully demonstrate to you guys today. And by going through a multitude of past paper questions and tweaking a couple of things here and there, it will hopefully prepare you as thoroughly as possible for the exam that you face on Monday. You will recognize some of the things that we do could potentially come up either in paper one. It could also come up in paper three. So a couple of things on your end. Number one is, can you please make sure you've got pen and paper? Even if you're planning to type and you're planning to basically make notes on your laptop, you will need pen and paper so that you can join me when I draw diagrams, etc. And number two is just completely and utterly lock in, because we're going to get through a lot in the session today. Starting with the labor market. Let's go. Right, so a lot of you have asked about the labor market and kind of the questions that could come up in the labor market. I start off with one caveat. I actually think the labor market, the reason why a lot of people have issues with it is because of the fact that it is often very badly overtaught. Edexcel, in terms of the content and what you need to know, it's fairly limited. There isn't a great deal to the labor market. But what I need you to recognize is the fact that if it's a 25 marker, I actually think it's not the best choice. Now, obviously, you can get a horrible 25 marker alongside it, in which case it might be the right choice. The reason why I say it's not the right choice is not because of the fact that it's like too complicated. It's actually the opposite. It's actually, I think, so straightforward that actually coming up with detailed analyses to get into level 4 is a bit more difficult. Nonetheless, let's deal with a question that I think hasn't come up for a little while, and I want to make sure that you almost have like a set answer to if it were to come up. So June 2018, in fact, you know what? Let's go straight to the exam paper. June 2018, paper one has a 15 marker about the mobility of labor. Okay, so if I just quickly go to that paper, and I want to demonstrate to you guys that there are certain answers where it will be the same thing regardless of the context, regardless of what they ask about, these points will always work. So just to show you what the question paper looked like, I'm sure you guys have seen this by now, but June 2018, question 6E looks like the following. So if my internet will just load. Okay, here we go. The question says, with reference to extract C and your own knowledge, discuss policies businesses and government might implement to reduce labor immobility to benefit the energy sector. Okay, the word and is in bold, so it's important that you recognize the fact that you cannot enter into the top level unless you do one of your analyses on policies that the government could implement and one on what businesses could implement. I would not mix the two together, by the way. I would have them as separate. So I do one policy of the government and then evaluate it, business, and evaluate it. Right. Now, there are a couple of things about the mobility of labor that I want to talk about. The first is there are two types of mobilities, and this question doesn't specify which one they want you to talk about. We're actually going to talk about both. But we've got the geographical mobility of labor and then the occupational mobility of labor. Let's start with geographical. The geographical mobility of labor is the ease with which individuals can move from one area to another to take up a job. Now, it's important to recognize that it's not just how easy is it for you to move from an area to another in terms of like logistics. That's obviously very important. It's also like the incentives that you might have to go and relocate. So for example, the lock specimen paper, paper one, they have an extract about how if you move to Spain, you get access to free healthcare, like you get access to their GPs. Well, that will improve the geographical mobility of labor. More people would want to move to Spain because of the fact that they can get access to those doctors. Does that make sense? Similarly, one of the past paper questions has a multiple choice about which of the following improves the geographical mobility of labor. The answer was the provision of information by the government. In other words, if I know about a job opportunity, let's say up in Edinburgh, that suits my skill set, that I am perfectly qualified for, it makes it more mobile, or it makes labor more mobile if they are informed and they actually understand that that job is available. Yeah? All right. So here's the question. I don't even need us to read the extract. I want you to recognize that for the vast majority of the questions, we are already going to have the answer lined up, and we're just going to contextualize it around the data. It is very rare, there are occasions, but it's rare that your answer is entirely derived from the extract. In other words, theory is always theory. It will always, always be the answer. So I'm going to just go back and share my board again, because let's write some stuff. If you get a question about the mobility of labor, this is what I want you to write. The first thing I want you to talk about is education and training programs that the government could provide. Yeah, that should always be number one. And the reason why that has to be number one is because it will always work. If I want to improve the occupational mobility of labor, which is basically how easy can someone go from one sector to another to take up a job, well, they need to develop the skills necessary to actually do the job. So it will always work. There is no context where education and training will not work. So that's number one. And all I need to do to add depth here in a 15 marker is to do two things. One is to identify the problem from the extract. So the extract mentioned that, for example, there was a major skills shortage in the energy sector. There weren't enough technicians and engineers that could go and take up those jobs. Okay, so the government could target those type of degrees, like engineering and STEM subjects, to try and encourage more people to pursue those careers. For example, they could subsidize their education. They could provide bursaries, which is basically like essentially they pay for your education. Now, if I want to add even more depth, and 15 marker, I definitely do want you to add depth. The extract mentioned that there was, in particular, a shortage of females doing STEM subjects. All right, well, it makes complete sense then that you target predominantly females and try to encourage them to go and pursue STEM-related degrees, etc. Yeah, so that will basically be the analysis. Yeah, so that will be the first analysis. Eval. The evaluation to it forevermore, and it will always be the evaluation. The evaluation always is time lag. Yeah, it's going to take a very long time for individuals to actually develop these skills. Now, how do I develop that? Well, one, in the extract itself, it literally said that there is a significant time lag in a highly regulated industry. And two, the easy way you can develop it is just to explain that these type of degrees and these type of qualifications, realistically, they are very high skilled. Therefore, this is not going to be a quick fix. You're not going to just suddenly get people coming here and knowing, like, developing their skills overnight. So that will always work as an evaluation. That's one. Now let's do businesses. And by the way, just to be clear, that was occupational mobility. Yeah, so I basically dealt with that like that. So again, my topic sentence for that question would be something along the lines of, one way in which the government could improve the occupational mobility of labor in the energy sector is to invest into education and training programs. Cool. That's the starting point. We evaluate it with, however, it could be a time lag. Second analysis. It will always work. I will add a few more things, by the way, to occupational in case specifically the question is just about occupational. But number two is we're going to talk about firms providing housing subsidies, always. Again, it will always work. What is a housing subsidy? Housing subsidy is where essentially the firm will pay or partially pay for your rent or for your mortgage. Yeah. Why would that incentivize people to relocate? Well, obviously, they're getting their accommodation paid for. Now, it does two things here. The first is that you might incentivize individuals who are already in the UK that possess these skills to relocate to wherever the energy sector is. So, for example, in the UK, a lot of it is in Aberdeen. So that's the first thing. So I incentivize those people to come and take up those jobs. But the second thing that I can do, and it's mentioned, by the way, in the extract, is that I may incentivize individuals who already have these skills, who live overseas. They can relocate to the UK because the housing is basically covered. Make sense? That is the analysis. It will always work. There is no context where you're trying to improve the mobility of labor and a housing subsidy wouldn't work. So that's the analysis. Evaluation. I think the evaluation, there are three issues that you can outline, all of which evaluate housing subsidies. So they're not separate points, but they're combined together to make one coherent paragraph. Number one, the first issue that you have is it depends on your kind of marital status and your family ties. So realistically, do you guys agree that if some people are slightly older, they're more likely to therefore have a spouse, kids, etc.? It's far easier for someone who's, I don't know, like a single Pringle to basically go and relocate to Aberdeen than someone who's got a family to think about. Therefore, the first consideration is, well, actually, if they've got a family, realistically, they might not be able to relocate to wherever that job is. That's the first issue. And that could be for people both in the UK and overseas as well, yeah? That's the first. The second thing is Brexit. Brexit makes it harder because now you have to get a visa. Before we were part of the EU and there was free movement of labor between us and the EU, well, now Brexit makes it a lot harder for them to basically get a visa. The last, number three, is language barriers. Even if someone possesses all of the skills, they have all the technical skills to work within the energy sector, if they cannot speak English, then do you agree that that's a pretty big problem? I don't know, like a nuclear power plant and like there's an emergency and they can't say emergency. It's not going to be good, yeah? So that's the point. Those three things will always work. So number one, family. And again, by the way, it's important to recognize there's a misconception here that often people think that application marks are exclusively earned in the analysis. That is not true. You are able to, and you will get application marks when you apply at any point in your exam, including the evaluation. In fact, I'd love you to use the extract as part of the evaluation if it's necessary, yeah? So for example, this particular extract said that the average age of people in the industry were above 50. Do you agree that above 50, realistically, they're probably going to have a family? Yeah. So that's the first one. Number two, the second thing about it we said is the Brexit. So that makes it a bit more difficult for them to basically relocate. And the last is language. Yeah. There are language barriers that may prevent them from actually taking up those jobs. Okay. Right. Some of you may have noticed why I chose this as my first question. This was my first question to go through because I want to dispel a very, very kind of annoying myth. There is a myth that in the bigger questions, the 12, 15, and 25 markers, that you cannot get into the top level unless you've done a certain number of diagrams. That is a myth. It is not true. This question, for example, doesn't lend itself to any obvious diagrams. There is no point in me adding a diagram. The points are much better, explained really well. There's no point in trying to shoehorn a diagram in for the sake of having a diagram. Is that super clear? Of course, I want diagrams. If there is a question where a diagram is relevant, like last year's 15 marker, there were two diagrams. I would have done it in the analysis and the evaluation. Both analyses. My point, though, is that do not go into the exam with this kind of mentality of, oh, I have to draw a diagram. I have to draw a diagram. That is not true. If it lends itself to your point, if it supports your point, for sure. Here, there is no obvious diagram. Therefore, there is no need for a diagram. That's our starting point. Right. Now that we've dealt with that question. Oh, you know what? I actually said that I would add an extra one for both the occupational mobility of labor and another one for geographical. So in case the question is like two factors that can improve the occupational mobility of labor, the other one that you could talk about, so the second more occupational one, is advertising. So advertising could be either the government promoting that particular sector, or it could be the business itself. Like they could, for example, go and send representatives to, I don't know, like school fairs and university fairs. They could run campaigns on TV. Good example, by the way, to understand that by is, have you seen all those adverts promoting people to work, to go into the army, the navy? It's like, oh, I was born in Carlisle, but I was made in the Royal Mail, not the Royal Mail, Royal Navy, might as well be Royal Mail. Anyways, the point is that what's the point? They're trying to encourage people to pursue that as their career. Therefore, those always work, yeah? Again, the evaluation to that, by the way, is that it just may not work. It may not necessarily actually lead to people pursuing that kind of degree or that course or that particular career. So it's a sunk cost to the firm or the government. It may not necessarily actually like help. Yeah, that's the first. And the second, in terms of occupational, housing subsidies will be the first one for a geographical mobility of labor. The second thing for geographical mobility of labor, I appreciate we have two twice here, it's fine, is transportation. So like HS2 right now that they're finally building it, that might improve the geographical mobility of labor because, for example, if a job is let's say based in London, you don't necessarily need to relocate to London if you can get on a train that takes you from Birmingham to London in, let's say, 2 hours or an hour and a half, or how long they say it's going to take. Yeah, does that make sense? That is all there. Yeah. So number two was transportation, and that helps us answer any question now on the mobility of labor. Cool. Right. Let's go and deal with another question. In June 2019, to be honest with you, is not the best year for 25 markers. I think both 25 markers weren't amazing. One of them was on collusion, which I will deal with, by the way, later today. But the other one was on wage differentials. Yeah. Reasons for there being wage differentials in a particular industry of your choice. So let's deal with that question. And then we can move on from the labor market. All right. So wage differentials. First things first. If I were you guys, in terms of the industry that I would choose, to be fair, by the way, the answer in the examiner report for Edexcel was a kid that wrote all their answer about football clubs. And it was very reasonable in terms of their points, and they scored fairly highly. So whichever industry it is that you feel most comfortable talking about, I'm purposely going to choose the healthcare industry because of the fact that I can make specific points that work well in that particular industry. Yeah? So let's start. My first analysis in terms of why there is a wage differential is I'm going to compare neurosurgeons, so brain doctors, to receptionists that work through the NHS or maybe some nurses, etc., or even like the cleaners, yeah? And the whole point is going to center around the wage elasticity of both supply and demand. So wage elasticity of supply and demand. Right, let's understand what those concepts are first before we actually delve into the point. So, wage elasticity. Elasticity generally, by the way, is the responsiveness of one variable to a change in another variable. Yes, in other words, when this changes, how does this react? Yeah. So here, if I told you the wages for a particular job have gone up, do you guys agree that naturally more people would want to do that job? So the supply would go up. So every time wages go up, the supply of that occupation or more people would want to offer their services and do that job. The elasticity, therefore, tells me essentially by how much does it go up by? Does it go up a little bit or does it go up dramatically? Yeah. If it can go up dramatically, then it's pretty much elastic. Whereas if it's a very small increase in the supply, then it's very, very inelastic. Okay, so let's start with a neurosurgeon and then compare that to, like, say, a receptionist. Do you guys agree that neurosurgeons are extremely inelastic in supply? And the reason why they are very wage inelastic is because if I told you that let's say the wages being paid to neurosurgeons went up by 10%, would I expect the supply of neurosurgeons to rise by 10%? Well, realistically, no, because A, it takes a very long time to become a qualified neurosurgeon, and B, the skills required are very, very high. It's going to take a long time and loads of very difficult exams for individuals to become qualified and therefore become a neurosurgeon. So the supply is extremely wage inelastic. In contrast, if I told you the wages being paid to the cleaners or the receptionist has gone up by 10%, would the supply of receptionists go up by more than 10%? Well, realistically, yeah, probably, because you don't need to, for example, go to university and study for many years to become a receptionist or to clean. And therefore, supply is far more elastic. It can respond a lot quicker. In the same way that if I dealt with, like, cashiers in the supermarket industry, the supply is a lot more elastic. Why? Because it doesn't take much to train someone up to become a cashier. Technically speaking, we're all cashiers now. Yeah. So that's the first part. So I go, look, that's the first indicator that neurosurgeons are obviously going to be paid a lot more than the receptionist. Then let's deal with it in terms of the wage elasticity of demand. Well, what does that mean? The wage elasticity of demand is the responsiveness of quantity demanded of labor to a change in the wage rate. So again, let's walk through the logic. The logic is if wages go up, do you guys agree that demand, of course, goes down? The firm can't afford to hire as many of those workers. Again, though, the responsiveness is going to determine the elasticity. In other words, if wages for neurosurgeons were to go up by 10%, do you think the hospital is going to turn around and be like, you're all fired, you're all gone, we don't need you guys? Obviously not, because they play an essential role and they are so important to the hospital that realistically the demand is very, very, very inelastic. Yeah. From a footballing perspective, by the way, whatever football team you support, if you think about like the best player at that football club, their demand is very wage inelastic because even if they commanded a higher wage, realistically they probably would be able to command and get the wage because they're so indispensable to that football club. Yeah. So neurosurgeons are extremely important. You can't replace them with capital technology at this stage. You can't realistically replace them with other doctors. They have to be very specialized. So that is extremely inelastic in terms of demand. Contrast that with the receptionist or with a cleaner. Are they elastic or inelastic in demand? Well, obviously they are far more elastic. Why? Because they are more easily replaced. You can automate, you can outsource. So for example, like the receptionist, you can get like a company that takes calls, inbound calls. They don't even need to be in the hospital anymore. They can be based abroad, right? So the point is that they're more easily replaced. All right, on that basis, who's going to get paid better? Obviously, the neurosurgeon gets paid significantly more than the receptionist. That is your first analysis. And there's a decent amount of depth there to develop that paragraph with. Cool? Right. The evaluation, in truth, isn't amazing. And this is why I'm not a massive fan of labor markets as a 25 market. When you look at, by the way, the mark scheme for their questions, they're quite limited. There's not much to say. It's very repetitive. Yeah. So anyways, eval, one of the things you could talk about is, okay, whilst the elasticity of supply of neurosurgeons might be very inelastic, what could happen though is that if wages were to go up, you might get more qualified neurosurgeons, so there's no time lag, who are based overseas now relocating to the UK. So they actually may come to the UK, in which case you could draw a very basic supply and demand diagram if you wanted to at this point and just show, okay, well, yeah, the supply might be very, very inelastic. So it might be like this for neurosurgeons, hit wages. Let's do this as quantity of neurosurgeons. Let's pretend I'm spelling it right. I think that's how you spell it. Yeah, this is the supply, S1, yeah? And demand is also very, very wage inelastic, yeah? So here are the quantity of neurosurgeons in the UK to begin with. This is the really high wage they have. But if suddenly you do get a sudden increase in the number of neurosurgeons in the UK, because a lot of them relocate, well, this might happen. In which case, the wages actually might start to come down. Okay? In other words, the wage differential may not be as significant. Yeah. Similarly, by the way, you could also argue that maybe because of Brexit, a lot of nurses from Eastern Europe may have already gone back to wherever they were from, in case they, because there's been quite a lot of emigration leaving the UK since Brexit. So maybe the demand, so the supply has shifted inwards for them, in which case wages for, let's say, nurses has gone up. The wage differential may potentially have gone down. Does that make sense? That's the first half of the essay. Let's deal with the other half of the essay, and it leads us quite nicely into a topic that I really want to kind of go and develop in a bit. So the second part of this question in terms of wage differentials, and this is why I specifically chose the healthcare industry. In fact, I want to show you guys how utilizing past papers to get points and to get ideas is a very good way to revise. So if I go to past papers over here, right, sharing, yeah. Okay, paper one, I think it was October, in June 2023, but let's have a look. Okay, in the section A, they had the following question. Lovely. Okay. This shows the index of pay in public and private sector, nominal average weekly earnings. This is the private sector. This is the public sector. It's expressed as an index number. But the key thing that I really need you guys to recognize is this. So it shows, by the way, in the next question, it says over 90% of workers work in the public sector. Nurses in the public sector have experienced wage rises lower than those in the private sector over the past 10 years. Using the information provided and the concept of monopsony, explain why nurses in the public sector have had lower wage rises than those in the private sector. Cool. That is our second analysis, by the way. Yeah. The reason why, even within the same industry, you have nurses who work in the private sector compared to those in the public sector. In the public sector, the NHS are a monopsony. What does that mean? A monopsony is a powerful buyer. What I mean by that is, if you are a nurse or you're a doctor, do you guys agree the vast majority of job opportunities, in fact, now real world knowledge for you, by the way, 90% of nurses work through the NHS, 90% of the work through the NHS. Therefore, who has the power in that relationship? Is it the NHS or the nurses? Obviously the NHS. I know it sounds really stupid to call them like a monopsony, but like they're technically buying your services. Yeah. Sounds like slavery, but anyways, yeah. So they are buying the services of those nurses. All right. If you're the NHS and you know that they have no choice realistically but to work for you, what are you going to do to their wages? Well, realistically, you might suppress their wages. And that helps to explain why nurses in the public sector are paid lower. Now, why are private sector nurses paid better? One of the reasons potentially is the private sector typically are profit maximizing. And so they want to ensure that they have the very best. I don't know how they differentiate between them, but that could potentially be it to motivate them to, be even better at their job than what they were doing through the public sector, etc. But they can also afford to pay a higher wage because they're generating more profits than the NHS would be. I mean, the NHS is free, obviously. Yeah. So the point is simple. The point is another reason for wage differentials may be the existence of monopsony power in the labor market. Now, I know at school you may have been taught the monopsony in the labor market diagram. It is not a diagram that you need to know for Edexcel. If you know how to draw it, by all means, go for it. Shove it in. If you don't, I need you guys to be so calm about it. Even when you look at the exam report, specifically for a question that asked about a monopsony of the labor market, there was absolutely zero expectation that you would draw that diagram. Therefore, honestly, I'm a big believer in just knowing what you need to know and nothing more than that. I don't need you to be, it's already the content is pretty dense. It's 2 years of content. Don't add more layers than is necessary. So anyways, that is going to be our second analysis to basically explain that, hey, it could be monopsony power that's suppressing wages for the nurses in the public sector compared to the private sector. Eval. There are two parts of the evaluation. The first part of the evaluation is that we have a national minimum wage and actually the national living wage now for those. It used to be, by the way, above the age of 25. It's now above the age of 21. But anyways, a national living wage, which protects those workers because they can't have wages going down below a certain level. The other thing that you could talk about here is the fact that they might join a trade union, in which case, again, what's the point of a trade union? Trade unions are there to bargain for higher wages on behalf of their members. So maybe they could try to push up their wages and be a little bit closer to the private sector pay. I mean, in the last year alone, loads of strikes, the junior doctors in particular, the nurses as well. And eventually their wages did go up, not by how much they wanted it to go up by, but it did go up. So therefore, you could argue that potentially that helps to reduce the income or the wage differentials that exist in the market. That's the labor market. Yeah. Does that make sense? So that is hopefully everything that you will potentially need to know for now. in terms of labor. Obviously, there's other things in terms of shifts of supply and demand for labor, but hopefully that's a fairly holistic and an important kind of overview of the key things I wanted to go across. All right, let's jump into some fun stuff. Starting with the following. Now, I can't remember what I covered last year. So if you've seen my Q&A from last year, by the way, thank you for being such big fans. But there may be overlap, but that's because of the fact that I think that knowing and recognizing how repetitive Edexcel is actually very, very important for you guys, and it'll prepare you for your exam. So let's share screen again. And I want to take you to the October 2020, one of the COVID years. Yeah. The COVID years are honestly, in my opinion, abnormally difficult. There's some awful questions in here that I want to kind of cover. Starting with the 10 marker. So let's have a look. Yeah, I did. Right, 10 marker is this. It goes. Assess whether complete nationalization of the rail industry might protect employees. Okay, just a few things about nationalization. Nationalization is a fairly hot topic in the sense that Labour, as part of their manifesto when they came into power, they have said that they are going to renationalize the rail network. I'll explain how they're going to basically do that soon. But the other thing is that Thames Water have been in the news for the last year for all the wrong reasons. Thames Water are a private company, by the way, and there's calls for them to be nationalized because of how badly mismanaged kind of Thames Water has been. But anyways, right, this is I think a horrible question. Assess whether complete nationalization of the rail industry might protect employees. It is so specific, and it's one of those questions where easily you can start to like freak out. This is what I need you guys to do. So the first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna take a nice deep breath. And then you're gonna go, okay, what do I know about nationalization? Hopefully the answer is nothing, not nothing. And using the information, I'm going to quickly jot that down on a scrap piece of paper and then potentially start working out some points from there. So I'm going to share my board again. Okay. Well, what is the difference between nationalization and privatization? Nationalization is where something that is owned by the private sector is moved into the hands of the government, the public sector. Yeah. It could be a whole industry. It could be a firm. Vice versa. Privatization is something that is owned by the government, is now moved into the hands of the private sector. For example, Royal Mail. Royal Mail used to be publicly owned. It is now owned by the private sector. Now, the rail network is a bit confusing. The extract is really useful to get this, kind of understand this. The tracks themselves, the actual train tracks, are still owned by the government. So that's nationalized. The trains, though, so the trains that go on the tracks that take you from, let's say, London to, I don't know, Newcastle, those are privately owned. Yeah. And the calls are, or what they're planning to do, is to renationalize and basically have full control over the whole thing. Yeah. Okay, right. Well, what do I know about nationalization? How can I compare that to privatization? Would you guys agree that a private firm, realistically, their priority is to maximize profits? That's a fairly logical thing to assume. So if I go and draw that out, well, what can I see? So I've got quantity over here, cost/revenue over here. All right, so let's draw our first cost and revenue diagram of the day. Here's AR equals D. And this is marginal revenue, yeah? Okay. Cool. Profit maximization, hopefully you recognize, is where MC equals MR. Yeah, you should hopefully know that by this point. Where the quantity would be this at Q1, and the price that they would be charging for their train services would be over here at P1. All right. The government, realistically, should not be trying to prioritize profit maximization. That is not really their priority. They're not a private firm. They're not accountable to shareholders. So what are they going to do? They want to maximize consumer welfare. Consumer welfare is allocative efficiency. The government are going to prioritize being allocatively efficient. You should hopefully know the rule for allocative efficiency is MC equals AR. Okay? So where is that on the diagram? It's over here. So first thing I recognize, okay, this is Q2. And the price, always once you have a quantity, by the way, you can always tell me what the price is simply by going up to the demand curve and dotting across. Right, and there's the price P2. Okay, so they're going to reduce the price they're going to charge for the train services, and they're therefore going to get more people using the train services. Okay, at this point, you might be like, what in the world? Like, how is this related to the question in any way? But then you go, I can easily amend it to make it about the question. If there are more people using the train service, well, do you agree that that means there'll be more demand for labor? Because labor is derived demand. If there are more people using the train services, if more trains are running, then they're going to need to hire more train drivers and, I don't know, ticket inspectors and blah, 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 right? Therefore, our first analysis is already now done. Is that the first benefit to employees is that it creates jobs. Nationalization is likely to lead to more job creation because of the fact that the government are going to prioritize allocative efficiency over profit maximization. I would draw this diagram. Notice that I haven't drawn an AC curve here, by the way. I didn't need to, because the whole point of my focus of my point is the price and the output. The lower price for train services is likely to lead to more people using the train. You can even talk about how they might switch away from other modes of transport. You don't really need to, it's a market, don't need crazy levels of depth, but that would be the first analysis. Okay. Now, I don't actually need you guys to do two analyses for a 10 marker unless it explicitly clearly says like two factors or reasons, like plural. Yeah. But I think that you can combine this with this paragraph anyway to make it 4 or 5 chains of reasoning to kind of ensure you get 6 out of 6 analysis marks. How does it work at the moment? And again, the extract is actually fairly helpful, but it's useful for you guys to know this. So imagine that you're a train operator. So let's say like Virgin, they used to have a train service. I think they stopped. But so if Virgin want to basically run their train from London to Manchester, let's say on a Saturday at 12 p.m., what happens is they bid for a contract. And the government will now select a particular provider to run their service at that time on that date for a certain amount of time, right? Okay. So imagine that you work for this company, and then when it comes to renewing the contract, they decide they don't want to renew it. What would happen to you? Your job is gone because your company hasn't renewed their contract. Or what if the government actually decides to go and give it to another firm? Again, your job is gone. Therefore, the other problem with it being privatized is that jobs are far less secure. There's less job security when it's in the hands of the private sector. Right. That contrasts with the government. What are the chances of the government going bust? The chances of the government going bust are so negligible, it's like next to nothing. The government could, if they needed to, they could print money, they could issue bonds, they could raise taxes. They have like infinite sources of money. Yeah. They're not going to go bust. Therefore, if you work through the government as a train driver, your job is so secure. You're good. Yeah. Now, again, real world knowledge that you get from data response. If you look at the extract, if I just go back quickly to the extract, you know that point I spoke about in terms of, if the company like in the private sector is mismanaged, they're going to potentially go bust. Well, look at what it says in the data. The data literally says the following. It goes, in May 2018, the government rescued the East Coast Line by renationalizing it. The line had been run by the private rail operator Virgin Rail, which was suffering lower passenger numbers and revenue than forecast. In other words, a private company, you can remember their name hopefully for the exam if it comes up, East Coast Line, were doing so badly that the government had to step in and bail them out. And if it wasn't for that, then there would have been major job losses. Does that make sense? Again, by the way, if you look at 2021, it has a question about Thomas Cook. Thomas Cook were mismanaged and suddenly shut down. That would have led to loads of job losses. So our analysis, just to clarify again, was there's more job creation and the jobs that are created are more secure in the public sector. That clearly answers the question about whether it protects employees or whether it's good for the employees. Clear? Let's evaluate. Now, if you guys have been really sharp, you may already recognize that I already evaluated this. Why did I already evaluate it? There's method of madness, people. I did it in a very particular order. The question that we just did about wage differentials, our evaluation, so our second analysis actually, now becomes evaluation. The government has become a monopsony. If the government become the sole provider of train services and they renationalize the rail network, then they can suppress your wages. Because before you had the ability to bargain for higher wages by offering your services to the multiple private firms that run the train system. Now, if the government are the only provider of trains, you have no choice but to work through the government, and therefore the government can start to basically suppress your wages in real terms. And you can even, by the way, throw in some real world application here by giving examples of nurses and how nurses get paid significantly less in the public sector compared to the private sector. And that's 10 out of 10. Yeah? Hopefully that's clear. One last thing, and then I promise we'll move on to another topic. One last thing is, what if this gets asked as a 25 marker? Let's deal with it. So if you get a question about something like evaluate the case for nationalizing an industry of your choice, yeah? First things first, when they say industry of your choice, in this case, I don't want you to have a choice. I have chosen for you. The choice is definitely go and do the rail network. A, because now you know a few things about the rail network, and B, because we can make some excellent bonus points if it's specifically the rail network. Yeah. Now, I have no idea. It could be an extract about Thames Water, in which case, obviously, you can't just chuck in the rail network now. But the points are going to work. Yeah. So, starting point is number one. Our first analysis in terms of why nationalizing or renationalizing the rail network is a good idea is that it can help to increase allocative efficiency. So, number one, allocative efficiency likely to rise. Right. Let's talk. If you haven't watched my video on the different types of efficiencies, it's a very good idea to do so tomorrow. But beforehand, I want to clarify something about allocative efficiency. Now, I know the rule is MC equals AR, which is the same, by the way, as MC equals price, in case that's how you've learned it. It's exactly the same thing. The price is AR, yeah? And I need you to be able to recognize that on a diagram and be able to spot, whether a firm is being allocatively efficient, etc. However, there is something significantly more important that I need you guys to understand, which is whenever the consumer is better off, and I don't even need this to really make sense, by the way, I just need to accept it and write it in the exam because it will get credit. Whenever the consumer is better off, whether it's because the prices they're getting are lower or because the quality of the goods have gone up, it could be like reduced waiting times. It could be less customer complaints. I don't know, any of those, you will now always write allocative efficiency has gone up. Always. It will always be there. Yeah. If you don't believe me, and I mentioned this in my video, in the June 2013 paper, Old Spec Unit 3, they had an extract about egg farming. And I swear to you, in the extract was about how the hens could no longer be caged. They had to be free roaming and having a good time. Yeah. Anyways, in the extract, sorry, in the mark scheme, I swear they wrote the following. Edexcel, they wrote, happier hens lay better quality eggs, and therefore allocative efficiency goes up. I don't know about you, but if I'm writing about how happy the hen is in my exam, I am very unhappy. Yeah. And yet that was on the mark scheme. And therefore, I need you to recognize that whenever the consumer is better off, allocative efficiency goes up. The other thing to recognize is that consumers are also workers, both in micro and in macro, by the way. So the circular flow of income that we'll deal with potentially for the macro Q&A, but essentially consumers in the circular flow of income are also the households and they're also the workers. Therefore, if you're dealing with the workers and how the workers are better off, that would also be allocative efficiency. Okay, what do you think the first analysis is? The first analysis is literally what we just did for the 10 marker. You just combine it all into one paragraph now, which is that it's going to lead to more job creation. It's going to lead to more secure jobs. You can contrast that with the East Coast line and how they were about to shut down. Well, the government ain't going to shut down anytime soon. Therefore, not only are the jobs being created more, more jobs are being created, they're more secure as well. Yeah. Now, there is a little bonus that I want to add into there to make it even better. So remember how we spoke about in that paragraph that we're going to switch from profit maximization to allocative efficiency. All right, so if I quickly redraw that again. So AR equals D, and this is MR. Those of you, by the way, that are watching this on TikTok, if you want to see what I'm drawing, go on the Expert Tuition YouTube channel. It's all there. So this was the initial price that was being sold for trains and the number of trains being used when it was privatized. Now it's nationalized. We said MC equals AR. So we're here somewhere. Yeah, so this is Q2. And the price was there. Okay, anyone recognize the extra bonus point that I've just given you? Why did I choose the rail network? Other than the fact that we now have some real world knowledge about the East Coast Line being on the cusp of bankruptcy and the government stepping in and bailing them out. Any other reason? The other reason is because this improves the geographical mobility of labor. If it's cheaper for people to basically use train network, it means that people can be more mobile and take up jobs. That's amazing. You could therefore be correcting market failure in the labor market as well. Wow, what an analysis, yeah? That's your first paragraph, and you add layer upon layer of depth in that 25 marker, yeah? That's our first analysis, yeah? Let's evaluate. What do you think the evaluation is? We've already evaluated. The evaluation is the government becoming a monopsony, so it might result in really bad exploitation of the workers within the industry. They can suppress the wages. And again, you can develop it. You can give the example, by the way, of nurses. I know that's not the rail network, but that's a great example to give in terms of the wages being paid in the public sector through the NHS are significantly lower than the wages being paid in the private sector. That's our first analysis. Let's go. Second analysis. Second analysis is that nationalization is likely to result in higher levels of productive efficiency now. All right. First things first, let's do some revision. What is productive efficiency? Well, the clue, by the way, is in the name. Productive is producer, yeah? So productive efficiency is where you are operating at the lowest point on your AC curve, otherwise known as the MES, the minimum efficient scale, yeah? So if you're at the bottom of your AC curve, what would have happened at that point? Well, hopefully you would understand that at that point, you have fully tapped into the economies of scale that exist in that network or in that industry, yeah? Okay, I think there is a phenomenal point here that you could throw in. And again, this is why I want you guys to recognize that more than anything, past papers are your best friends. Because if we read the extract again, I'm going to draw your attention to a few lines. Well, it's just one line, really. It says the following. Here we are. The rail network of 2,500 stations and 32,000 kilometers of tracks was renationalized in 2001. Just to clarify, by the way, the extract clarifies in terms of the different components of the train network and which parts remain private, which parts are nationalized. But why did I draw that up? Why did I talk about 2,500 stations and 32,000 kilometers of tracks? Well, what's the point of that? Well, the answer is that this, and by the way, the clue again, just one more clue, I mean, just give me the answer, is look at the 12 marker they asked. Discuss whether the rail network can be considered to be a natural monopoly. That's going to be our analysis. Our analysis is the fact that the rail network probably resembles a natural monopoly, and we need to do some revision. This is the difference between a natural monopoly and every other monopoly or any market structure that you will recognize. Typically, when we draw the AC curve, we would normally draw it like this. It would normally have that shape, right? Where we've got economies of scale over here, MES, and then we've got diseconomies of scale over there, yeah? Okay. Natural monopoly has a very distinctive shape in terms of the AC curve that I need you guys not only to be able to draw, it's very easy to draw, but also to understand why it looks the way it does, yeah? So if I just draw this out. Here's Q, here's cost. Right, the AC curve looks like this for a natural monopoly. Now, again, when you did this at school, and I understand why, I don't mind, you may have drawn the MC curve and MR and AR. I don't need you to. The reason I don't need you to is because the point that we're going to basically explain is explained perfectly well through this one thing, just the AC curve. So let's understand something about why it looks the way it does. Well, average cost, we know mathematically, hopefully we know, is the total cost divided by the quantity. Agreed? Okay. Well, imagine how expensive it would be to build 2,500 stations and 32,000 kilometers of train track. We're talking, if not billions, then possibly even trillions, yeah? We have so much, the cost is crazy. Hence why that question 12 marker, by the way, you just need to explain that the fixed and sunk cost here is astronomical. It doesn't make sense for more than one firm to be providing this good. Because if my starting point over here is in like the billions, do you guys agree that unless I divide that huge number by a significant amount of output, my average cost is astronomical? And therefore, the issue you have is this. If we have multiple firms providing this particular service, if I assume, we just make up numbers over here. So let's say this is 100% of the market, yeah? So this is 100% over here, yeah? I'll take the numbers away in a second. Well, if I go, okay, imagine that there were, let's say, 10 firms in the market, 10 train providers in the network, in the market, they would each only have 10% of the market's output. So they would operate somewhere over here, agreed? And notice that at that level of output, their average cost is astronomical. It's all the way up there because their fixed cost is so crazy high, they're not spreading out over a large enough quantity. Therefore, their average cost is crazy high. Okay, two things about this. Firstly, are they productively efficient? Well, clearly, no. But the second thing is that if their costs are all the way up there, what is the minimum this firm must be charging to basically just make normal profit? Just for this firm to make normal profit, nothing more than that, they would need to charge a price equal to this. And therefore, the price they would need to charge would be extortionate. Allocative efficiency, again, therefore, would be low, by the way. And a lot of people are therefore priced out. Yeah, so if I just change now this 10% to make it a Q1. So, in fact, I'm going to call it QP to represent privatization. So when it's privatized, it was that quantity and that would be the cost. I'm going to call it CP, yeah? Whereas if it's now nationalized, the government provide the entire network, all the trains, it's literally just the government. Well, now we're operating over here, so I'm going to call that QN to represent nationalization. Look at their cost now. Their cost is significantly lower. And therefore, two things. One is they're significantly more productively efficient. How do I develop this, by the way? Even more detail is that they can tap into enormous economies of scale. Like what? Well, now that you know that it's made up of 32,000 kilometers of track, 2,500 stations, this is all real world knowledge, by the way, you could talk about how they could bulk buy things like their trains. They could bulk buy steel for the train tracks. They could bulk buy the ticket machines. These are all examples of purchasing economies of scale. I could do financial economies of scale. They would be so big, and bear in mind, it's the government. The government could take out humongous loans at very low interest rates because it's the government. They're very credit worthy. Yeah. That therefore allows them to operate at CN on my diagram at a far, far lower cost than would be the case if it was privatized. Therefore, is it a good idea to privatize it? Well, yeah, of course it is. Yeah. So nationalize it. Yes, it would be. Yeah. This, by the way, this diagram is amazing because it's an argument against competition. We normally think of competition as a really good thing, but this is a clear illustration that the competition is not always such a good thing. Cool. That paragraph is amazing. Can I add one more layer just to make it just beautiful if you've got the time in the exam? The last layer is as following. Do you guys agree that when the rail network is privatized and private firms make supernormal profits, what do they do with some of their profits? Well, some of their profits are paid out in the form of dividends to shareholders. And therefore, if we now move away from the private sector to the public sector, the government, do the government have shareholders? Well, technically, I guess we are, but like not really, right? So what can they do with all the profits? Well, the government can pledge to invest all the profits they generate back onto the network. And now you can give me an example of what they do with the money. So, for example, they could improve, I don't know, add air conditioning into the trains, maybe a cafe, Wi-Fi would be nice. Like, yeah, maybe make them faster, invest into like bullet trains. I don't know, whatever. Give it like 2 or 3 examples, not more than that. And now, by the way, that also counts as application, just so you're clear. Real world knowledge. Yeah, there's very easy ways to get real world knowledge like that. The very final thing that you basically wrap that up with is, therefore, dynamic efficiency may also be higher. Does that make sense? That is the second analysis, and it is phenomenal. Let's evaluate. The evaluation that I want you to do is as follows. Is that the problem with nationalization is the government become a complete monopoly, a pure monopoly. And whenever there is a pure monopoly in a market, the issue is always going to be something called X inefficiency. Very straightforward concept, but can I just show you guys diagrammatically what it looks like? So here's our diagram. And I know we just drew a diagram with it being a natural monopoly. It's not a problem to basically evaluate it with a normal AC curve. So here we are. Here's the AC curve over here, yeah? Okay, right. We're going to pick any random level of output. So let's say we're producing a Q1 over here. Okay, do you guys agree that at that level of output, Q1, the cost should be here, where it hits the AC curve at C1. I'm going to call that point A, okay? The problem, though, is that because there's complete lack of competition, there's no incentive to minimize costs because there's no one else going to enter the market. You literally are the sole provider in the market. You end up actually incurring a cost somewhere, just this is random, by the random point, at point B, where the cost is there at C2. You are therefore X inefficient by that distance. X, by the way, is a number. They've never asked you to calculate it. I doubt they ever would, but you never know. But just to clarify, it's the difference between what your cost should have been and what it really is. And therefore, this idea that the government are going to have all this profit, that they could invest and they could, be dynamically efficient and all of that may not happen. They actually may mismanage it so badly. So speak to your parents. I wasn't alive then, but in the 70s, when the rail network was nationalized, it was known for being super unreliable, like loads of delays. The quality was really bad. The trains were quite dirty, etc. So the point is that actually moving it into the public sector may deteriorate quality. It may not improve quality because of X inefficiency. And that is nationalization wrapped up. Cool. Let's move on to my next topic that I want to quickly just talk about. So one of the things that I think they haven't asked for a long time in terms of, in fact, they hadn't really haven't examined it in any meaningful detail in paper 1 in the new spec is monopolistic competition. So let's quickly revise the theory. And then I want to take you through a very basic question from a past paper in the old spec, yeah? So first, what is monopolistic competition? Now, the name, I hate the name. It's so confusing and kind of it redirects you in the wrong way. So it sounds a lot like a monopoly, but it's actually nothing like a monopoly. Monopolistic competition is closer to perfect competition than it is to a monopoly. And this is what the 5 characteristics are. So number 1 is many small firms. There are loads and loads and loads of firms providing this good. Number 2 is the goods sold is similar, but slightly differentiated. There's not a great deal of difference between the products being sold in the market, but there is some difference. Number 3 is there are low barriers to entry and exit. It's pretty easy to enter this market. And number 4 is imperfect information. So in other words, you're not fully informed. You might have some idea of kind of market prices and differences in prices, but not like you're not perfectly informed. And finally, number 5 is limited price making ability. Firms can set prices, but not dramatically. Okay, can I take you guys through 2 examples to just wrap your head around it to make sense of monopolistic competition? Because this is realistic. There are industries that are monopolistically competitive. The first example is hairdressers. Why? Let's go through it. Number 1, first characteristic, many small firms, right? How many barbers or hairdressers do you reckon there are in the UK? Easily, hundreds of thousands. Like there are thousands upon thousands of hairdressers in the UK. So that's number one. Number two is the goods sold is similar but slightly differentiated. Now, I know that people tend to be very loyal. In fact, the extract we're going to look at from January 2013 says that 70% of people, roughly, I think it was, tend to be very loyal to their barber, or like, they just kind of go to the same hairdresser all the time. But if you think about it, there isn't a great deal of difference in terms of what you're getting. Yeah, getting a haircut. Yeah, whether your barber is able to do your fade like that, or not amazingly, there ain't that much difference going on here. So number two is that. Number three, the third we said is the barriers to entry and exit are low. Right? Do you guys agree? If I compare it to, let's say, like an airline industry, imagine the barriers to entry for that industry or a supermarket industry compared to a hairdresser. What do we need? We need like scissors, a mirror, hopefully, a chair, I guess. You don't even need a space, by the way. Obviously, like you want to rent and you want to basically have like a facility or like a shop, but barbers can also be mobile. They can come to your house and actually cut your hair there. Yeah. So the point is that the barriers to entry are pretty low. Yeah, they're not very high. Number four, imperfect information. Okay, so realistically, I am not going to know the price of a haircut in the whole of the UK or even in my area. I might have a rough idea though. That leads me into number five. So just to kind of give you some context, our office used to be in Edgware back in the day, and it was like a 10-minute walk from Edgware Station to where the office was. One day I was bored. I decided to basically walk down that road and count the number of barbershops there were on that one road. Guess how many barbershops were on that road? I counted 18 barbershops. I don't know why. I don't know why people in Edgware are so hairy, but like the point is that clearly there's loads of firms, yeah? Now imagine I went into 3 or 4 of them. Do you guys agree that there will be some differences in terms of prices? But would there be dramatic differences in prices? Realistically, no, because the goods being sold are very similar, and therefore you end up with regional monopolies. In other words, in a specific area, a handful of firms will dominate, and their prices will be very similar to one another. Clear? That's the first example. The last one, very quickly, is newsagents. So if you go through the characteristics, number one, many small firms, there's loads of newsagents in the UK, so that's one. The goods sold are homogenous. You could argue, the goods sold are similar but slightly differentiated. You could argue that the goods are almost homogenous. The difference is that the shopkeeper, I don't know, one person might be smiling at you, one might be screw facing you, or they might have like I don't know, an American candy section of sweets, even though American chocolate is disgusting, but whatever. Yeah, so there could be that. Number three, the barriers to entry are pretty low. You do not need to have enormous amounts of financial muscle to enter that market. Number four, imperfect information. Okay, so I will not know, for example, the price of a Red Bull can in every single newsagent in London, but I have a good idea roughly in terms of the 2 newsagents across the road from one another, and therefore, are they likely to change or have dramatically different prices? There might be like 5p difference here and there, 10p difference here and there. There is not going to be a dramatic difference in price. Yeah, right. What is really important to recognize is that in monopolistic competition, in the long run, we assume firms only ever make normal profits. And therefore, let me draw the diagram, and then I'm going to show you guys a question. So if we draw the diagram, here we go. So if you are not comfortable drawing diagrams, I highly advise that you go and watch my step-by-step on YouTube. It's got a very easy way to follow how to draw the diagrams. This is MC. Here's AR equals D. And this is MR over here. And then we've got this. So this is the level of output they produce. And this is P1. Okay, right. It's important to recognize that revenue is price times quantity, right? So therefore, P1 times Q1 over here, that whole area, represents the amount of revenue being generated. And this output level, Q1, by the way, is my guiding point. Whenever you know the output level, you always go up from the output until you hit the AR curve to get the price. And you always go up from that output to the AC curve, I haven't drawn it yet, to get the cost. That means that you are the master of your own diagram as long as you know the output that is being produced, yeah? Those of you that are on TikTok, it's a good idea to join on YouTube because then you can see my diagrams, yeah? All right, so I need to ensure that you see this quantity over here, Q1, where it hits AR, I need AC to hit it at that exact point. It needs to basically be a tangent. So I'm going to draw it sort of like that, and then it goes down. It doesn't go through it, by the way. Then once it hits the bottom, the MC curve, that's the lowest point on the AC curve. So then we go outwards like that. Okay, that's AC. And then can you see, by the way, that once I basically go from the quantity Q1 until I hit the AC curve, it hits it there, it's the same as P1. And therefore, they are making normal profit. There's nothing for me to shade because there's no excess. Cool. That is the assumption in terms of what's likely to happen in the hairdressing industry or in terms of the newsagent industry, etc. Yeah? All right. Let's have a look at the question I wanted to look at. So if I share screen. And let's go alt spec. Okay, Edexcel, unit 3. Right, January 2013. Okay, question 10 is, so in the alt spec, they had a choice in terms of data response. They could get it, they could do number 9, number 10. We'll do a number 10. Here we go. It's all about hairdressing. It's about contrasting actually hairdressing to supermarkets. It goes, in the light of the information provided in the first paragraph of extract 2, assess the likely profitability of a firm in the hairdressing industry. Use diagrammatic analysis to support your answer. Happy days for you guys. You will draw the diagram that I just drew. And you just need to now explain why they're going to make normal profit. The reason why is because if they're making supernormal profit, others will notice that they're making supernormal profit. And therefore, because the barriers to entry are low, new firms will enter the market. And that will compete the profits away. Now, you do not need to show that in the diagram. You only need to do that for perfect competition, where you transition from the short run to the long run. In monopolistic competition, the diagrams are static. In other words, there's no shift required. All you need to show is that in the long run, they're making normal profit. Vice versa, by the way, if in the short run, potentially some firms could be making losses, those who are making losses, some of them will, Skepta, shut down. Thank you. Right, they will shut down. And if they shut down, those who are left in the market now make normal profit. That's it. That's analysis. Cool. That's as simple as that. That will get you the marks. Right. The evaluation, I think a clever evaluation, is to question whether all of them actually do just make normal profit. So if you look, by the way, at the extract, there's a little sneaky asterisk next to hairdressers. Yeah, shows the 4 firm concentration ratios in selected industries in 2011, and hairdressers less than 5%. So it's really like, it's not concentrated at all. There's loads of small firms. But then it goes, excluding franchise. Okay. Franchises are like Hobb, Tony and Guy. I don't know if you guys recognize these names, but they are pretty big firms. And in other words, there is a way for you to potentially grow and you can make supernormal profit. It is not true that all hairdressers make normal profit. Some hairdressers make supernormal profit. Think about hairdressers, for example, who cut the hair of like football players and like, celebrities, etc. They're obviously charging a very, very high price relative to what their cost is. They are definitely making supernormal profit, even in the long run. Make sense? So that would be the evaluation to a question like this. Yeah? Okay, cool. Right. If we have time, we'll come back and do 12 and this will be the 15 marker later in the Q&A, but let me just try and get through as much as I possibly can. So what was next on my list of things? Right, I know. Right. Let me share my screen again, and let's go here. Some water. Log specimen, paper 3. So the log specimen, by the way, your teachers have access to it. It's not something that you may potentially have been examined on it as part of your mock up to now. Who knows? But anyways, there was a 12 marker in the paper 3, and it was basically discuss the factors necessary for the success of a cartel. Okay, let's deal with that, because remember how the very beginning of this Q&A, I took you through a question where I said there is a set answer. I want you to just write this. If this comes up, it will always work. When we did the mobility of labor, this also has a set answer. So first things first, what is a cartel? Now, I suspect some of you are basically shouting, drugs, drugs. Yeah, that is actually a pretty good example of a cartel, but let me explain why. A cartel is where 2 or more firms collude, in other words, work together to fix an artificially high price. Yeah? Now, collusion is basically illegal, as hopefully you guys will know, but it's important to understand what is required in order for them to collude. The way that they collude typically is that all of the participants in the collusive agreement will restrict their output. Therefore, the good becomes more scarce and the price goes up. Okay, let's understand a few things. Again, one of the things that you could do in the exam is to go, okay, this topic, where does it fall under? Because that may be a clue. Well, this topic falls under oligopoly. Why does it fall under oligopoly? Because realistically, it only really happens in an oligopolistic market. Why? What is an oligopoly? An oligopoly is where there is only a handful of big firms, like the supermarket industry, for example. Yeah. So why is that relevant? One is because in an oligopoly, it is far easier for us to coordinate and come up with a collusive agreement. There's only a few firms. If there were thousands of sellers, how can I organize it so that everyone restricts their supply at the same time? It ain't going to happen. The second thing is this. If I draw a very basic supply and demand diagram, so here's QP is supply, and here is demand, yeah? Okay. If I go, okay, this is the market price for this good, P1, and the output is Q1, yeah? Which of those 2 curves do the oligopolists have enough control over? So let's think about it in terms of supermarkets. It makes it easier to understand it with an example, yeah? So if I look at Asda, Sainsbury's, Tesco, which of those two curves, supply or demand, do they have enormous control over? Well, clearly the supply curve, because they are the biggest suppliers in the market. If they therefore all restrict their supply, that will cause supply to shift inwards. And that causes the price to go up, which is what is necessary for a collusive agreement to take place, or what is collusion is high prices, right? If I contrast that, by the way, with that monopolistic competition. So let's say hypothetically that, I don't know, a newsagent decides to reduce the number of Snickers bars that they basically have in their shop. Is that going to restrict the supply of Snickers and cause the market price to go up? Well, clearly no, because they're a teeny tiny percentage of the total number of people selling Snickers. It's going to do practically nothing, right? Therefore, the first condition necessary for a cartel to be successful is that they must be an oligopoly. And the reasons they have to be an oligopoly is, one, it is easier to organize a cartel when there's fewer firms. And two, is that they have enough control over supply to be able to shift it inwards and raise the market price. Yeah. Now, within that, as a kind of bonus point, but it's a very good point, especially if there's data to support it, who has to be part of the cartel? Who has to be part of the cartel is the biggest supplier. Tesco would need to be part of the cartel for it to really be successful. Yeah. In the extract, by the way, for paper 3, it was about oil producing countries, so OPEC basically, and it mentioned the last line of the extract said, for a cartel to be successful, the USA, the world's largest producer of oil, the USA must be a member. That's your first point. And it's just explained by the fact that it's easier to coordinate, and two, because of the fact that they are able to basically restrict supply and raise the price. All right, let's evaluate. The way I always want you to evaluate cartels and collusive agreements is through game theory. And specifically within game theory, there is something called prisoner's dilemma. I need to go through prisoner's dilemma to make sure you guys actually understand it. This is prisoner's dilemma. The way it works is this. Imagine that you and I have both committed 2 crimes. Sorry. The first crime is a fairly petty crime. It's not that serious. The second is a far more serious crime. Now, the police only have enough evidence to charge us for the petty crime, but they actually suspect us of the more serious crime as well, but they don't have enough evidence to charge us for it. So what they're going to do is this. They're going to now take us into 2 separate cells, and there is no way for us to now communicate with one another. And they now say the following to me. They go, listen, if you confess, and let's call the other person Bob, yeah, and Bob does not confess, well, we will give you immunity. You'll be let out today. And he's going to get 10 years prison time. Vice versa, though, because if he confesses and you don't confess, he's going to get immunity. You're going to get 10 years. If both of us confess, we're both going to get 5 years prison time. And if neither of us confess, well, they can only charge us for the petty crime. We therefore would only get 2 years prison time. Right. I know there's a lot of information there. We can depict that on something called a payoff matrix. Yeah. So a good question, by the way, to do from past papers is in section A of 2022, it asks for a payoff matrix about this company called Pilgrim's Pride and Tyson Foods, whatever. Anyways, I'm going to do a generic one for now. So over here, we're going to write the following. So I'm going to have me over here. So here I am. And my moves were confess. I'm going to depict that by the letter C, and don't confess, which is depicted by the letter D. Yeah. And over here was our good friend Bob. And this was confess. And again, don't confess. Okay, right. Let's draw this out. A payoff matrix illustrates the different utilities that each player gains from pursuing a particular strategy. Yeah. So remember, we said that if I confess and Bob confesses as well, they can only charge us. So they can only charge us for. So they give us 5 years prison time each because we both confessed. Yeah. Now prison time is obviously not a good thing. So therefore, we're going to get 5 years each. So I'm going to do -5 for me. The left number, by the way, in this is going to represent the utility for the player on the left. The right number is for the player at the top. Now, if you've done it as like / like that, I don't mind that as well. That's perfectly fine. So I'm going to get 5 years. Bob's going to get 5 years. All right. In the event that I do not confess and Bob does confess, he's confessing, I'm not confessing. Because I didn't confess, I'm in big trouble. I get 10 years prison time. Bob gets nothing. Vice versa over here, though, I get immunity. I get 0. He gets -10. And the last thing is that if we both don't confess, we both get -2, -2. Okay? All right. Let's understand what actually takes place. Now, if you looked at those four outcomes, imagine you don't know me and you don't know Bob, but you could choose an outcome out of those 4 things that is the best for us collectively. Well, do you guys agree that the best outcome for us collectively is over here, to not confess?
I'm going to prove that that is never, ever the outcome of the game. And that's what Prisoner's Dilemma shows. Yeah. So the way we work it out is by actually playing the game. And we're going to go, all right, let's pretend that we are me, right? So we're Ahmed. And we're going to assume that Bob is initially playing Confess. So he's playing Confess. Is it better for me to play Confess and get 5 years prison time, or to not confess and get 10 years prison time? Well, clearly, it's better for me to get 5 years. So I'm going to underline my better move because that was my better move. Still me. The other thing is if I go, all right, now Bob is playing Don't Confess, meaning that what's my option? I either confess and get nothing, or I don't confess and get -2. What would I rather? Well, obviously, I'd rather get no prison time. So again, I confess. Do you guys notice something? I have what is called a dominant strategy. A dominant strategy is where you play the same move regardless of what the other player did. No matter what Bob did, it was better for me to play Confess. Now, if we reverse the game now, so let's play as Bob and we go, all right, let's assume Ahmed is playing Confess. So if I'm playing Confess, is it better for Bob to confess and get 5 years or to not confess and get 10 years? Well, obviously, he should confess. If I play Don't Confess, is it better for him to confess and get nothing, or should he not confess and get -2? So again, obviously, he should confess. The outcome of the game then is that we both confess. The point of Prisoner's Dilemma is to illustrate that in the end, collusive agreements are likely to break down. And I'll show this, by the way, with an example in a second. But the point is that we end up at a suboptimal outcome, that where we end up is not really where we wanted to be because the risk involved in actually not confessing was so high, I couldn't take that risk and Bob couldn't take that risk. Right. Now, often when I basically do this, the first time people look at me and they go, that's lovely, but what is that? Like, how's that to do with economics? Like, what is this? The reason why is because we can now depict it in a slightly different way in terms of not confess and don't confess, high price, low price, and show collusion. Yeah. So let's do it in terms of Tesco and Asda. So if I draw Tesco over here and Asda over here, and bear in mind, by the way, you are making up numbers. Even in the June 2022 paper where they told you that essentially they gained about 361 million, I think it was dollars, yeah? You didn't actually need to use those numbers. I probably would have, but you didn't need to. You just needed to recognize and understand that they were asking for you to show a two-player payoff matrix where Prisoner's Dilemma is basically being depicted, yeah? Anyways, so the moves for Tesco and Asda will be high price. Here's high price. And this is low price. And over here, we've got high price and low price. Okay. And I'm just really rough over here like this. I'm gonna write revenue over here. And let's assume this is in millions of pounds, yeah? Okay, right. I prefer easy numbers for you guys to not necessarily memorize, but like be able to work out in the exam because the game has to make sense, yeah? It needs to be the case that we end up with low price being the outcome of the game, yeah? Right, so we start off by going, if Tesco play high price and Asda play high price, in other words, they're colluding, it would be 100 million each. So 100, 100, okay. Now, it is important to understand that whoever plays low price, so whoever breaks out of the cartel and undercuts everyone else should gain because that has to be the incentive to break out. And whoever's still playing a high price is going to lose. In other words, at Tesco, if they play low price, they're going to get, let's say, 150 and let's say 50 for Asda. Right, as soon as I now write those numbers in, it's very easy for me to know what goes into this box over here because it would just be reversed. So now it's high price amongst Tesco. They're now going to lose. They get 50. And Asda, by playing a low price, win by getting 150. Right, the only one that needs to basically be like, you kind of need to work it out, yeah? Is in order for this to be the outcome of the game, and that's what I need to depict. Prisoner's Dilemma illustrates that they're going to play low price, yeah? Your number needs to be lower than 100, so lower than what happened when they colluded, but higher than when they got backstabbed. So we're just going to use 75, yeah? Use 75, 75. And now we've illustrated something. What we've illustrated is the optimal point for them is to collude, play high price, but they just can't trust each other. There is always the incentive. You always think, oh man, if I play low price, I get 150 million, they get 50. The problem then is that you end up in a mutually destructive price war where you both play low price, rather than high price. That is Prisoner's Dilemma in a nutshell. And that is an amazing thing to be able to bring in. I would really only draw the payoff matrix, by the way, if it asked for it, or if it was a 15 or a 25 market. In a 12, you don't really need to. You could have explained that in words more than like thoroughly enough. Yeah. Anyways, that was our first analysis where we said, hey, it needs to basically be an oligopoly, and the evaluation is Prisoner's Dilemma. Number two, what is the second thing that needs to happen for a cartel to be successful? Well, number two, the good needs to be price inelastic. Why? Let's understand what that means. Price inelastic means that when the price goes up, because obviously they're going to raise their price in a cartel, if it's inelastic, there is a less than proportionate fall in demand. In other words, prices could go up a fair amount, demand would only go down a tiny bit. Yeah. So if I show that in a kind of arrow, so if I go, okay, price of something is going up, do you guys agree that obviously demand has to go down? So whenever price of something goes up, demand must be going down. Yeah. Now, in order to work out what happens to the revenue, you need to work out whether the good is elastic or inelastic. If something is elastic, let's start with that first, actually. Let's do some quick revision. So if it was elastic, all right, elastic. What does that mean? Elastic means highly responsive, yeah? So what that means is that a small increase in the price, demand is more than proportionally going to decrease. So I put now another arrow next to demand. Can you guys see that in that instance there, would your revenue be rising or falling? Well, if your price goes up a little bit, but your demand goes down a lot, your total revenue would decrease, yeah? Good question, by the way, to do is Unit 1, January 2011, question number 2, I think. Or number 4, sorry, my bad. Number 4, yeah? Yeah, anyways, later. So that's the first. Now, if it was inelastic, on the other hand, so let's do that exercise again. And I go, all right, price has gone up. Straight away, as soon as price goes up, you go, demand is going down. So demand decreases, yeah? Okay, again, by the way, if you've been taught things like gifting goods and whatever, Edexcel, you don't need that. So I don't want you to even know it. So get that in a bit. So anyways, price has gone up, demand has gone down, right? If it's inelastic though, if demand is inelastic, is the demand reactive or not reactive? Well, the answer is it's not very reactive, yeah? It's basically like cigarettes, for example, because they're addictive. Even when the price goes up, demand does go down. People can't afford to buy as many cigarettes, but it's not going to dramatically decrease. In other words, which one do I now put another arrow next to? Do I put it next to the price or the demand? Well, clearly, I put it next to the price. The price change is greater than the reaction that demand has. In other words, in that instance, revenue would go up. And that is the second characteristic that needs to be satisfied for a firm to collude, to form a cartel, is the demand needs to be price inelastic. Is that super duper clear? So that is going to be the basis of our second analysis. And again, by the way, realistically, if we're operating within an oligopoly, there is clearly a lack of substitutes in the market. So demand is going to be inelastic. But even if it wasn't just because of that, you can explain, like, for example, the extract was about oil. Oil is highly inelastic. Like, you need oil for most things. Like, most cars still run on oil. Most factories still run on oil, etc., etc. So you just explain, hey, it's very inelastic. Therefore, they know that when they raise their price, it will lead to a less than proportionate decrease in demand, and therefore higher revenue for the cartel members, which helps explain why they would form a cartel. Cool. Let's evaluate. Second evaluation here is to just always generically say that in the long run, the demand for whatever this thing is likely to become more elastic, and just justify why. So one of the reasons could be that things tend to become more elastic. For example, oil. Now, because people are starting to switch to electric cars. Now, because if oil prices remain higher, people might switch to like public transport, etc., etc., etc. So there's a variety of reasons to explain why demand might become more elastic. It could also be that if, like, let's say, are found guilty, or they're found to have colluded, the reputational damage that they incur and the fines that they get, it might actually lead not only to the prices obviously going down because the cartel will be bust at that point, but also because of the fact that it might represent a chance for a new firm to enter the market. So then there might be more substitutes in the market because of the reputational damage that it's caused. Yeah, is that super clear? So that would be the evaluation, is that in the long run it might become more elastic. Right. Let's do a few questions together. Starting with Unit 3, June 2015, old spec. Let me have some water. Right. This is what the question is. The question says the following. Discuss, so 12 marker. Discuss why price fixing and anti-competitive behavior by foreign formula milk producers in China may have been possible. Okay, cool. Anyone recognize what this question is? This question, what is price fixing? Price fixing is collusion. Do you know what this question therefore is? This question is literally the exact same question that I just took you through, where you go, number one, it needs to be an oligopoly. I just need to find evidence that it's an oligopoly. Then I can evaluate it with Prison's dilemma. Number two, the demand needs to be inelastic. I'm going to show you guys that this is very inelastic. And then in the long run, the evaluation, it might become more elastic. Okay, let's deal with it. Watch this. Extract A, yeah? I'm just going to point you towards the answer so you understand why it's Edexcel are very repetitive. The questions come up in slight variations every single year, like the same stuff. So if you look at the extract, here we go. Where is it? So the first thing is that it needs to be an oligopoly, yeah? And the extract literally says that, there we go, in 2012, the total share of the top 5 foreign formula milk brands reached 60% in the Chinese market. Is it an oligopoly? Well, clearly it's an oligopoly, yeah? It's obviously an oligopoly because 60% 5-firm concentration ratio is very concentrated. It means that there's only a handful of big firms, yeah? So that is clearly number one. Can they therefore control the supply of foreign formula milk? Yeah, they can. If they restrict the supply, does that cause the price to go up? Yes, it does. Can they therefore price fix? Yes, they can. That's the analysis. That's why they probably did it. Evaluation, President's dilemma. Works all the time. It will always be on the mark scheme. It's entirely valid. That's the first. Second analysis. Remember how I said the demand needs to be inelastic? Well, remember, by the way, the wording of the question is very particular. It was specifically foreign formula milk. Okay. I don't think I have ever read an extract in my life where the demand for something was more inelastic than this. Yeah. Because the alternative was the Chinese formula milk. And the Chinese formula milk basically killed 6 babies and caused sickness in 300,000 others. Okay. If you're a parent, do you agree that you will basically pay whatever it takes to get the foreign formula milk and not the Chinese formula milk if it literally killed babies, yeah, and caused 300,000 others to get sick? I can't give you a better illustration of demand being more. It's not perfectly inelastic, but it's not far off. Yeah, it is so inelastic here, and therefore that is the second analysis. Clearly, the evaluation. Right. One of the things I need you guys to start recognizing is that Edexcel do this thing where in the extract, in section B, there are often clues in other questions where you go, hey, I already wrote something about this, or there's a question I'm about to do where this is a clue. The clue is the question that you would have done just before it. With reference to extract 3 in your own knowledge, examine the likely impact of government subsidies on the profits of Chinese formula milk producers. The government are starting to subsidize the Chinese firms. 2 things therefore might happen. 1, the subsidy might allow them to generate more revenue, and the revenue could be invested into improving their health and safety and the quality of the formula milk. Therefore, actually, if they basically kind of fix up a little bit, then people might be open to switching to the Chinese formula milk. The demand, therefore, for the foreign formula milk might start to become more elastic. Also, reputational damage typically in the long run starts to fade. People eventually forget and move on. And therefore, it may actually become more elastic in the long run. Again, are we clear? Demand might become more elastic. Yeah. I just want to emphasize that concept of questions being clues for other questions in papers. In the June 2023 paper, the 15 marker was about price discrimination. Now, the only reason I'm not going to go through that is because I did a video very recently that you guys can watch, literally going through the question itself. But in the 15 marker, it was about the impact on profitability for Netflix or any online streaming provider. The clue for one of the evals was the 8 marker, because the 8 marker was about the likely XED for online streaming services. Well, you would have already written that, hey, by the way, it's probably substitutes, Netflix, Disney Plus, Amazon, etc. They're substitutes. They provide a very similar kind of service. They even show some of the same movies and TV shows, right? So you know how one of your analyses, when you talk about why they would price discriminate, is the demand amongst adults is inelastic? There's your clue. The clue is actually the assumption that they're inelastic may actually be incorrect. It may not be inelastic. It may potentially be, what's it called? It may be elastic because there are genuine substitutes in the market. Yeah? Is that super duper clear? So that's how we deal with that question. Okay, cartels all done. Let's see which questions. I want to do actually one more quick question. Hold on. So let's go over here. Right. I want to do 2021 because that allows us to delve into a few things. So in the November 2021 paper, they had an extract about Thomas Cook. I have a theory about the 2020 and 20. Honestly, I don't know, to be honest, but they are abnormally difficult. And I honestly think it was almost experimental by Edexcel because hardly anyone would have sat those papers. It was a COVID. And so poor people who'd had to sit that paper, but like they are so weird, some of the questions in here. But anyways, let's deal with this one first. So 2021, we have the following 15 marker. Here goes. With reference to the information provided, discuss the decision by Jet2 to increase its package holiday prices. Now, a little bit of context, and obviously you would know this because you would have read the extracts and you even would have answered all the questions before it. But one of their rivals, Thomas Cook, had just shut down. Yeah. So if you look at, for example, figure 1, it shows the concentration ratio in the market. So TUI are 29%, then Jet2 16%. Thomas Cook were third. They had 13% of the market, and then they closed down. Yeah, so that's going to be one of the points. Well, then we're going to use that. And then if you look at figure 2, by the way, it shows the price that they're charging. I'll just zoom out a little bit. For this exact same holiday, exact same package, 12 hours apart from Thomas Cook basically closing down. Yeah. So the price was £788. It then goes up to £824. It's a pretty big increase in 12 hours. Yeah. Okay. Let's deal with the question. How do we basically answer this particular question? So I'm going to share my screen with my board. Again, those of you that are on TikTok, it's a very good idea to come onto YouTube because that's where I'm drawing everything and you can see my screen. Okay, right. Let's start with basic. Let's start with a really easy point, which is to simply say that, well, if Thomas Cook are closing down, do you guys agree that one of the reasons that Jet2 may be raising their prices is simply because they've got more demand? Some of the people, and it says like 600,000 people were stranded overseas, they need to get home, and therefore they're desperately scrambling around for another holiday provider or a company that can help them. Well, TUI and Jet2 are the two biggest firms. So they're likely to switch over to them and kind of go with them. Right, okay, we can draw this diagrammatically. Very basic diagram. Now, I could just draw supply and demand, but I feel like, especially for a 15 marker, you guys are too good for just supply and demand. I want there to be slightly more sophisticated diagrams if you can draw them. So we're going to draw a cost and revenue diagram. So we're going to go MC, and here we go. AR1 equals D1, and here is MR. That's MR1. This is profit maximization, as of course you know. The price we get from going up to the AR curve, that's P1. And let's make them make supernormal profits. So like something like this. AC, C1, right. And notice, by the way, that when I draw this, I am not going to shade in the supernormal profit area. The reason why I wouldn't is because of the fact that, especially for you guys, you can only do it in black ink in the exam. It can become really overwhelming for the examiners if you're shading. So I want you to do the corners of the areas with the letters. So obviously we've got P1 as one corner, C1 as one corner. This is going to be A, and this is going to be B. Okay, so when I reference the initial supernormal profit area, it will be P1 AB, ABC1. Yeah. Okay. What I just said is that they are now going to get more customers, so AR and MR will shift outwards. So you just start at a higher point on the y-axis, and I want you to just shift it parallel. So this is AR2 equals D2, and this is MR2. Profit maximization occurs here. Q2. Oh, do you know what I just realized? This is not geeky enough. Let's be super geeky. Why am I writing P1? I'm writing the price. 788, wasn't it? I think it was £788. You guys can check later. And then the new price was 824. I actually can't remember if it was. Obviously, right, that's a nice double application there. Come on. Right, anyways, so that's going to be the price. We then got from Q2 until we hit the AC curve. Notice that my cost has gone down, by the way. Now, when you draw this, if your cost doesn't go down, not a problem. Ideally, I want it to go down, by the way, especially for bigger questions, because it opens up an extra chain of reasoning, by the way, but not necessarily for this question, for another question that we'll do later. So this is going to be D, and this is going to be E. I promise I know my alphabet. I'm skipping C on purpose because we already have C's over here. Yeah? Cool. Our first analysis is simple then. Our first analysis is one reason why Jet2 may be raising their price is due to their increased market share. And then you basically explain that some of Thomas Cook's customers are going to switch over to either them, TUI, or one of the other, Expedia, etc. AR and MR therefore will shift out, and that can help explain why they're commanding a higher price. Cool? That's our first analysis. Let us evaluate. And the way I want us to evaluate is by talking about a particular theory that they are not allowed to examine you on, but if you write in your answer this particular concept, it will be credited. It's always on the mark scheme. It's kind of like our get out of jail free card in certain circumstances when it asks for game theory, but prisoner's dilemma does not work that well. Example, by the way, paper 3, June 2019, question 1C, disaster question. One of the worst questions ever. If I have time, I'll go through it today. But basically, in that question, it was about like an advertising ban, and they were reducing their prices in response to the advertising ban. And they also wanted you to talk about it in terms of game theory. Well, prisoner's dilemma doesn't really work that well here because they weren't really colluding. Like it was just they responded to the advertising ban by cutting their prices. But anyways, right. The get out of jail free card is something called the kinked demand curve. Let's go through the kinked demand curve together. It's a very basic theory. It's a pretty stupid theory, to be honest, but it works quite well for us, so we're going to use it. So if I draw the following, P and Q. Okay, first things first. One of the things that we're going to do is we're going to assume that this monopolist, so this oligopolist, so in this case Jet2, are initially charging a price over here. So this is the point they're operating at. Call it A. They're charging a price of P1 over here, or PE, let's do. And this is the number of customers they currently have, yeah? And what the theory says is that it does not make sense for Jet2 or any oligopolist to compete through prices. They shouldn't raise their price and they shouldn't reduce their price. And I actually need this to make sense for you guys so you know why it is what it is and not just memorize it. Because then in case in the exam you forget what it looks like, you can work it out. I don't want economics to be a series of memorized concepts. It needs to be logical concepts. Okay, if I'm Jet2 and I now raise my price, so above PE, anywhere over here, the assumption in this theory is that the other holiday package providers, TUI, Expedia, there's one called On the Beach or something, right? Those guys, what are they going to do to their prices? Well, according to the theory, they're not going to adjust their prices at all. They keep their prices for that same holiday or similar holiday unchanged, yeah? Now, the problem with them keeping their prices unchanged is that according to this theory, loads of my customers are now going to switch over to them because they go, well, why are you charging me a high price? I can simply go and switch over to another company. Therefore, the assumption is above the price PE, demand is highly elastic. Because if I Jet2 raise my price and you guys keep your prices unchanged, a lot of my customers switch over to you guys. Hence, above that point, demand is very elastic, like that. And if I show that, by the way, a very small increase in the price from PE to P1, look at what it does to the quantity demanded. It dramatically decreases from QE to Q1. Did it make sense for you to therefore raise your price? Well, of course not. Scenario number 2, even though we don't need it for this particular question, you have to draw the whole diagram though, but I still want to explain it, is okay, let's say I reduce my price. So I'm Jet2, I decide to reduce my price. What are you guys going to do? Well, you don't want to lose market share to me. Therefore, you are also likely to reduce your price. And if we all just reduce our prices, demand, yeah, it will go up, but not dramatically because everyone's reducing their prices. You're not going to get a massive increase in demand. Demand then below this price PE is very inelastic. Looks something like that, okay? Yeah? And again, and this is AR equals D, by the way. If I depict that with like a massive decrease in the price from PE to P2, it's a massive decrease in price, right? Look at how small the increase in the demand is. Did it make sense for you to reduce your price? No, it did not make sense. This, therefore, is always going to evaluate any time prices are adjusted, always. Whether you're raising prices or reducing your prices, you're simply illustrating that it's a bad idea. Therefore, we can go, however, Jet2's decision to raise their prices may backfire. And then you draw the diagram and you explain that, hey, if they raise their prices, but the others don't raise their prices, then it's going to basically lead to a more than proportionate decrease in demand for your services, less revenue, not good for you. That is the first half of that essay. Second half of the essay, in terms of why Jet2 are raising their prices. Why do you think I'm doing this question? I'm doing this question because I want you guys to understand repetition. I need you guys to understand that Edexcel asks the same thing in different ways and the same points work in different questions. You know the second reason why they may have raised their price? They may have formed a cartel. That's why. Because the market is more concentrated. If the market is more concentrated, in other words, there's just a few like big firms, is it easier or harder to form a cartel? Well, obviously easier. And if they form a cartel, it needs to be inelastic in demand. Well, it's inelastic in demand. These travelers that are stranded overseas, the demand is very inelastic. If we therefore work together, me, let's say I'm Jet2, you're TUI, and Expedia, and all those guys, we all decide, hey guys, let's raise the price, yeah? Do you agree that we would get away with it? And the reason why we'd get away with it is because the increase in the price would lead to a less than proportionate decrease in demand, therefore higher revenue for the cartel members. That is the analysis. Evaluation. The evaluation, you should already know it now. Prisoner's dilemma. You could also evaluate by saying it's illegal, by the way. I just think prisoner's dilemma is just a level up, though. Yeah. So if you're stuck in the exam, illegality is always an evaluation. Like, recognize the fact that that will always work. That is entirely valid. But I think prisoner's dilemma and drawing the payoff matrix for a 15 marker is a bit more wow. And I like wow. Yeah. So that is the answer to that question. Yeah. Okay. Right. What else do I want to cover today? Let's deal with mergers. So I want to actually start off with a 25 mark or potential 25 marker on a merger. And then we're going to do what I think is like an awkward question that they have asked before, by the way, in the lock specimen paper. But let's deal with like the 25 marker first. So let's say you got a 25 marker about the effect on efficiency. So the effect on efficiency of a horizontal integration. Okay, so let's do that. And remember, by the way, the difference between a 25 marker and the other questions, especially like tens and 12s, etc., is the level of depth. I need you to offer me your analysis to have layer upon layer of depth. Yeah. So our starting point, number one, for a question like this, I want it to be, and I want, by the way, your topic sentence, just exam technique actually. Topic sentences are basically the first sentences of each paragraph. If an examiner reads your first sentence, they need to know exactly what your answer is immediately. I don't want it to be like fluffy language either. Yeah. So if, for example, I got a question like, I don't know, discuss the extent of contestability in a particular market. Yeah. It would be something like, one reason why the UK coffee shop market is contestable is that there is evidence of entry. Yeah. Clearly answers the question and is really to the point. I don't want you to give me long, convoluted responses. Yeah. Use the wording, throw it back in their face, tell me your answer. Here, if it was a question about efficiency, I would start off by saying, one likely effect of the merger between, I'm going to do Jaguar Land Rover, just so we have an example. So Jaguar and Land Rover, a couple of years ago, merged. They're now Jaguar Land Rover. Really amazing name, yeah? Is they are likely to become more dynamically efficient. So number one, we're going to deal with dynamic efficiency. Okay. Just to clarify, dynamic efficiency doesn't have a set definition or a set rule, unlike productive and allocative, which are static efficiencies, where you can spot them on a diagram. I need you to just understand that dynamic is simply where you're adjusting with the times, you're adjusting by investing into the latest technology and like you're innovating, etc. Yeah. So what I want, and especially if you get a merger question which asks for a diagram, for example, June 2016, Unit 3, old spec question about two banana distributors merging, Fifis, Chiquitas, whatever the name was. Anyways, the diagram that I want you to draw is AR and MR shifting outwards. And I will talk about the importance of diagrams in a second in terms of like 12 markers. But for now, this is what we're going to draw. Yeah. In fact, I think I drew it earlier. Didn't I draw earlier? If I did, it will save us time. Let's just go back. How do I do this? I so did. Oh, there we go. Right. Ignoring the prices, because the price is not relevant here now. We just get rid of this and make it P1 and P2. Yeah. Okay. So this was P2. This was P1. Okay. Right. I draw this and I basically illustrate that because they've merged together, do you guys agree that they have more market share? And when they have more market share, that means they're combining forces and they now have more customers as a collective unit than they would be individually. Cool. All right. There are so many points that I can draw upon just from this diagram. And this is why I want you to draw this diagram. The first is the price of their cars are likely to rise from P1 to P2. This is likely to result in their sales are likely to also rise from Q1 to Q2 because they have more customers. Yeah. Now notice in my diagram that the cost went down. And I want you to draw it so your cost is ideally going down. So the way you do that is your AC curve, make it quite curved so that Q1 hits it further up. And so when you do Q2, you're hitting it lower down. Why? Because I now have a bonus analysis. And my bonus analysis is that they are, as a bigger firm, better placed to tap into economies of scale. Yeah. What does that mean? Economies of scale is that as your output increases, your average cost decreases. As a bigger firm, do you guys agree that they can tap into purchasing economy? And I want, by the way, examples. I always want you to get some application mark for going, for example, they could take advantage of purchasing economies of scale. Give me an example. Yeah. What's the example is what could they bulk buy? Well, every firm realistically are going to bulk buy something. Well, what would they bulk buy? Well, they would bulk buy the steel, the leather, I don't know, etc., the engines. Yeah. And therefore, when they bulk buy, they can negotiate lower prices per unit because they're buying in such large quantities. So the fact that they're selling more cars from Q1 to Q2 will allow them to basically bulk buy in larger quantities. And hence why the cost has gone down from C1 to C2. Bonus point. Whenever cost goes down, you're going to say productive efficiency is rising as well. Yeah. But remember, our focus is going to be back on dynamic. How? Because what's happened to the profits? Well, their profits clearly have gone up from P1, A, B, C1 there to P2, D, E, C2. Every single time a firm has more profits, I need you to now go, they're going to do the following with their profits. So they could use that to invest into like research and development, to innovate. And just give an example. Like I wouldn't come up with ridiculous examples like, I don't know, like a flying car. But what I would do is something like, I don't know, self-driving cars. Yeah, that's realistic. They're investing loads of money into that. Or they could, for example, provide like, better electric cars, especially if people are now switching to electric cars. That will allow them to get ahead in the market by producing like a, I don't know, electric car that has a longer range or whatever. Yeah, just give an example. Once you've given an example, you wrap up the paragraph again by answering their question and saying, this therefore increases dynamic efficiency. What a paragraph, yeah? That is the first analysis, yeah? Let's evaluate it. Now we could evaluate it in one of three ways. I can combine two of them together, by the way, if I feel like I'm struggling to develop. But the first one, I think is the easiest to develop and the best one here, which is, one of the problems with the merger is that rather than experiencing economies of scale, the firm may begin to experience diseconomies of scale. They might become so big that they suffer from managerial diseconomies of scale, which is essentially the idea that they become so big that managing such a vast operation spanning multiple countries, thousands of employees, might be very difficult. And therefore, they end up incurring a higher cost. They go beyond the MES, and now they're somewhere like, I don't know, like over there where their cost is now higher. Yeah. So that's the first thing. Now, the way I can develop it when it comes to a merger in terms of diseconomies of scale, they sometimes have this as a separate point on the mark scheme, but we can easily combine it together to make it better, is that the firms may suffer from something called cultural clashes. What does that mean? Cultural clashes literally means that the managers or the senior managers, or even just the staff, just don't get on. They basically start butting heads. Like, imagine, especially because these are two companies that have been in the car market for a long, long time. They may therefore have very set ways in terms of how they conduct their business affairs. If you now merge, so initially when there's a merger, everyone's like really hyped up and they're like, oh yeah, like it's gonna be amazing. And then a couple of months down the line, you're like, I hate these guys. I hate them. And therefore, the merger, not only does it result in diseconomies of scale, results in cultural clashes, and therefore in the long run, the firms may actually end up demerging. That is a really good eval. Yeah. So that works for a 15. It works for a 25 as well. There's enough depth there. Now, let's say you were struggling to develop diseconomies of scale. What you could do is be clever with your topic sentence. So what you could say something along the lines of is, however, the merger is likely to result in a significant fall in efficiency. And now I'd draw their attention to two. I'd go, this is for two main reasons. So number one, diseconomies of scale, develop that. Number two, we did it earlier today, they might be X inefficient. They become so dominant in the market that the lack of competition means that they become really lazy and complacent. Make sense? That is the two evaluations that you could do combined into one, yeah? Okay, right, let's do the second analysis. Second analysis. Now, bear in mind, by the way, I could have done a whole analysis about economies of scale, and that's entirely valid, and that would work really well, and I don't mind you guys doing that. And the point, by the way, is it would basically be that they are productively efficient, yeah? That would be the analysis, yeah? And then evaluation is productively inefficient because of the fact that they might experience diseconomies of scale, yeah? Anyways, the second half of this, what I would do is I want to delve into a topic, and we're going to revise it as we go along as well, which is the firms, when they combine together, can now exert a higher degree of monopsony power. What does that mean again? Well, if you remind ourselves what we did earlier, we did it in the labor market, but now monopsony is a powerful buyer. So if you combine forces and you're now a really big car manufacturing firm, do you guys agree that when it comes to buying things like your steel, because of the fact that you're such a big buyer, you can force down how much you pay for your steel? Think about what that is in terms of the firm itself. For Jaguar Land Rover, do we agree that if I can force down how much I pay for my steel, that is a decrease in my variable costs? And I can now draw another diagram. And the diagram we're going to draw is the following. So let's start off with the firm making supernormal profit. And here we go. So cost/revenue. So let's go. Here's MC is step one. Then we've got AR equals D. And then MR over here. And the profit maximization is this. Q1, go up to hit the demand curve. That's P1. All right, and let's make them make supernormal profit. I always wanted to make them make supernormal profit, by the way, unless explicitly told otherwise. Like, for example, the Thomas Cook question, they were clearly making losses because of the fact that they were shutting down, or the government were bailing them out or trying to bail them out through a subsidy. But anyways, this is A, this is B. Okay, cool, right. Let's understand, when you've got variable costs falling, what does that do? Because again, I need economics to make sense on a logical basis and not just like memorized. So if I kind of just quickly go through AC over here, AC is equal to TC over Q. Do you guys agree? And if I said, oh, what is total cost? Well, total cost is the addition of your fixed cost plus your variable cost. Okay. Do you guys recognize then, whether it's fixed cost changing or variable cost changing, AC has to shift. AC must shift because total cost is always going to change whenever both fixed or variable costs change. In other words, I know for a fact that AC will always shift whenever costs change. The other question then is, what happens to marginal cost when, let's say, fixed costs go up? Let's start with that. Well, a fixed cost is something like rent. So let's say the rent for McDonald's has gone up. Well, do you guys agree that that does not affect the cost of producing an extra burger? Each burger, the production costs are things like the buns, the beef, the cheese, blah, 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 right? In other words, is that affected by their rent going up? Well, no. Therefore, marginal cost does not shift if it's a fixed cost. Only AC will shift, yeah? Whereas if it's a variable cost, of course, then they're both going to shift, yeah? So we're going to have MC1, AC1. Right, second thing I want to talk about is that when we talk about cost shifts, I know that in theme one, for example, we'd always think about shifts in terms of inwards and outwards. I do not want you to think of cost curves shifting inwards or outwards. It's too confusing. I prefer you to just go, it's going to go up or it's going to go down, because that'll make your life a lot easier. So let's do it. We just said that their variable costs are clearly going down. Therefore, obviously, it's going to go down, yeah? Right. Which one should I shift first, MC or AC? The clue is, which order do I always start my diagrams in? I always start by shifting MC, because MC is always step one. So we're going to go a little bit further down over here, MC. This is MC2, yeah? Profit maximization occurs where MC equals MR, Q2. And we're going to go up over here. And that's P2, okay? Right, finally, now we basically, so notice the price goes down and the output goes up. The last thing now is that we are going to go and shift the AC curve down, remembering it needs to hit at its lowest point on the new MC curve. Go up from your new best friend, Q2, go up from Q2 until you hit the AC curve, and that is C2. And remember to do the corners of the areas to make the examiner's life a lot easier. All right, cool. Few things. Do you guys agree that when they exert monopsony power and their variable costs decrease, the first thing that happens is the prices they charge consumers goes down? What do we talk about then? Allocative efficiency goes up, yeah? The second thing you could talk about is the fact that their costs go down, productive efficiency up. Their sales go up, their profits, by the way, go up. I will illustrate theoretically why in a second. I know it might not look like it because you go, I understand, price went down and cost went down. There is a good reason, by the way. But now their profits go up. Now, I already talked about profits in the first analysis. So I don't need to labor the point too much. But what I can do to drag this out, the way I can drag this out is by talking about, oh, if their cars become cheaper, it becomes more affordable for low-income households. If their cars become cheaper, maybe, for example, these are the electric cars, people might be able to switch from diesel and petrol cars to electric cars, which is also kind of good for the environment. Don't start drawing me an externality and all that. Calm down. That's enough. That's the analysis, yeah? That's analysis number 2. Evaluation. There's a few evaluations. The first, and I think the best evaluation, is that rather than consumers being better off, mergers typically might mean that consumers are worse off. Do you guys agree that the market becoming more concentrated means that the demand becomes more inelastic due to a lack of substitutes? There's hardly any substitutes in the market. And you know what else increases the prospect of? It increases the prospect of a cartel being formed, because of the fact that if you've got only a small handful of big car producing companies, realistically, it's easier for them to form a cartel. And there we go. Easy peasy. That's the essay in a nutshell. Now, alternatively, by the way, I could have done X inefficiency. The firm might become really inefficient in that. The other thing is the CMA might also intervene to limit how much monopsony power they can exert over the suppliers. So you may not actually get them being suppressed that much. Yeah? All right. A few things I want to do in terms of monopsony before I jump into another topic. So first things first. There are only 2 realistic questions that they could ask about monopsonies. Yeah? One is an effect question, and another is a factors question. Right, let me explain what I mean by that. So if I look at the June 2017 paper, in paper 1 of June 2017, it had a question about the effect of monopsony power on consumers and on the suppliers. The suppliers, by the way, to be clear, are like the farmers, the people that supply their goods to the supermarkets, yeah? Okay, do you recognize that we've practically answered all of it just in that conversation that we've had? But let's just go through it together, yeah? Let's start with the consumer. Well, what happened to the consumer? What happened to us? Do you guys agree that monopsony power is kind of good for us because the prices that we get goes down? You draw this diagram. You explain that, hey, look, the variable cost would be decreasing for the monopsonist. So if, for example, Tesco are able to exert monopsony power, that then translates into variable costs going down. And as a result, all of this happens. Does that make sense? So that's the first analysis. Right, we'll deal with the evaluations in a second, by the way. Let's say the question now was not about the consumers, it was about the supermarket. In fact, you know, let's do suppliers first, and then we'll do the supermarket. So player two, so there's three players. Consumer, we talked about lower prices. Player two is the supplier, the farmer. What's happening to them? Well, they're struggling because their profit margins are being squeezed, right? And now there's various ways in which we can show profits are going down, yeah? The first way that profits could be going down is that it could be that the supermarkets are insisting on them. This was actually happening in the extract. They had to like pay higher prices for like their packaging. They needed like specific types of packaging. And so their costs were obviously going up. But then, you know, when your costs go up, you would normally want to charge a higher price, right? Are you able to charge a higher price if there's only a handful of supermarkets that you sell to? Well, obviously not. Tesco would be like, haha, no. You want to raise the price? Get out of here. Yeah. So the point is that you can simply go, hey, their profits are likely to be going down. The other reason why their profits could be going down is that the supermarkets may be insisting on them reducing how much they basically pay. Does that make sense? So number two, the effect on the suppliers is their profits are going down, clearly, yeah? Number three, what effect does it have on the supermarket? Well, here's the diagram for the supermarket. They make more profit, clearly. Variable costs go down, profits go up, they can invest the profits, they can become more dynamically efficient, blah, 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 blah. Eval. And there are generic evaluations. There are generic evaluations that work every single time. Number one, the CMA. The CMA could intervene and be like, stop it, stop doing it, it's bad, yeah? And actually, the clue, again, was the extract and the other questions in June 2017. It had a whole thing about how the CMA could prevent monopsony power. It's evaluation, it's a clue for you to be like, hey, the CMA might intervene and be like, you're not allowed to do this. And they could find them. Literally, the extract was about how they could find them. That's one. Number two, you know the suppliers, are they all helpless and little lambs that the supermarkets can take advantage of? Clearly, no. The reason why no is because if you are Pepsi or Coca-Cola, you are a supplier to Tesco. Are you a little supplier though? Well, clearly not. You're a massive supplier. Can Tesco therefore dictate prices to you and say, hey, we want it at that price? No, they can't, because you need each other. You have monopoly power to offset the monopsony power. You have the brand loyalty to be able to offset their monopsony power. It's a great eval, by the way. So not all suppliers are going to be suppressed. The other thing, by the way, that you could also talk about is that the suppliers might actually merge. So if the suppliers merge with each other, that will help limit monopsony power, because again, if you're a bigger firm, if you sell more goods, it's harder for the supermarkets to basically exert monopsony power over you. Cool? Right. So that's an effect question. What are the factors question, which they have yet to ask, by the way, in the new spec. The last time this was asked is Unit 3, June 2012, question 9C. Great question. Recommend you do it. Can I just go through what the question is? It was assess the degree of monopsony power in the groceries market. Watch this. I'm going to take you through so many different things and show you from the extract. Well, I'll pull up the extract in a second. I should do about the extract. But anyways, let's start with this. Number one. First thing is that do you agree that one of the factors that would indicate monopsony power is high is if you saw the prices being charged to consumers are falling? Diagram. So on the diagram, yeah, you draw the diagram and explain it. This is what it said in the data. In the extract, it said that the margin squeezed from manufacturers are shared with shoppers. That's your quote. What does that say? It basically says that consumers are actually loving this because they're getting a lower price. Happy days, consumers. But that indicates monopsony power is high. Cool. Second thing that indicates monopsony power is high is we said if the profits the suppliers are generating are going down, they were going down. Northern Foods, who are a supplier, and the extract is all about them, it said they were struggling against monopsony power. This is the quote, though. It's a long quote, but it said something like this. It said, a fresh burst of commodity inflation has raised input costs, and the buying power of the big supermarkets makes it hard for food manufacturing firms to pass these extra costs on. Right, there's a lot of information there. Let's digest it. Commodity inflation, what does that mean? It's like oil prices have gone up. Okay, imagine that you are a supplier, you're Northern Foods, your costs have gone up, okay? What would you want to do to the prices you charge this, Tesco and Asda? You obviously want to raise it. But if you're unable to raise it, what's happening to your profits? Your profits are going down. And is that therefore evidence of monopsony power? Hell yeah. Of course that's monopsony power. That's your second analysis. Another analysis, obviously on your need to, just giving you like loads of different points, yeah? Another thing that you could talk about is the fact that if it's easy for you to switch between suppliers, and the extract spoke about how Northern Foods were preparing like pre-prepared like microwave meals, and they used to like partner up with M&S, and then others caught up. Others basically started to do the same thing as them. And as a result, that meant that it was easy for them to switch between suppliers. I can therefore, if I'm Tesco, if I turn around to you and say, I want it at this price, otherwise I will switch to another firm, if that threat is credible, you're more likely to accept my demand for a lower price. Make sense? Because of the fact that you've got no choice, and I can easily switch and get someone else that basically supplies that good on for me. Yeah, is that clear? Those are the kind of things that you basically go, that's monopsony power. All right, let's evaluate. The evaluation is why monopsony power is not high. I said it already. Number one is if the suppliers merge. And this is what it said. Northern Foods were planning to merge with a company called Greencore. And the quote that I would throw into that paragraph of evaluation would be, behind the push for a merger was a belief that a bigger, more diversified firm would not be so easily bullied by retailers. Wow, what a quote. What does that say? It basically means that, hey, look, if you're a bigger firm, you sell a wider range of goods and services, you are not going to have prices dictated to you like a little small firm to merge, because that will help restrict monopsony power. Number two, we said, well, if there are big firms, then they can fight back. They don't have monopsony power exerted over. This is what it said. Multinational firms, such as Nestle or Unilever, possess the strength and the famous brands to fight back. What does that mean? Well, basically, firstly, some of you may not know who Unilever are. Trust me, if you Google Unilever, Unilever are one of the biggest firms in the whole world. They own some of the biggest brands. They own Fairy, Lynx, Lipton. I can go on. Yeah, it's enormous. Yeah. Now, okay, let's say you didn't know that. The fact that it said multinational brands, that means they're a big firm. Yeah. Hopefully, you might know who Nestle are, like Nesquik, all that fun stuff when you're a kid. Yeah. Anyways, does that make sense? That's the point. Is that there you go? That's not monopsony power would not necessarily be high there. Yeah. These are the kind of things that you can basically talk about as evaluations. The other evaluation, by the way, is just the CMA. That would always work. The CMA might intervene and be like, just stop it, behave yourselves. Yeah? Does that make sense? That's monopsony in a nutshell. If it comes up, hopefully you know how to answer it. All right, let's deal with one more merger question. And then I promise I am going to do externalities because about 1,000 of you asked about externalities. So I will deal with it and do some awkward questions about externalities as well. But first, let's just deal with this way. 50 marker in the Locke specimen paper, paper 1, was assessed the likely impact on efficiency of a demerger of a conglomerate. Fun. Okay. I want you guys to recognize that although that might seem horrifying and really difficult, it genuinely is very manageable. And I just need you guys to recognize the importance of planning, where you take a few minutes to plan, write fast, because it's a very time-pressured exam, but you need to understand that diving into questions like this, it's likely to lead to a major car crash, yeah? So let's start off by explaining what conglomerate integration is. You should hopefully know about this point, but conglomerate integration is where a firm merges with another in a completely different industry, yeah? So an example is Virgin. They're in multiple different industries. So there's Virgin Active, the gym, they used to have Virgin Trains, there's Virgin Airlines, I think it's called Virgin Atlantic. What else? There's loads that I'm probably forgetting. Right now, a couple of years ago, after the COVID pandemic, after the financial crash, Northern Rock were bailed out by the government, so they were a bank. And a few years later, they were sold to Virgin, yeah? And Virgin now have a bank, it's called Virgin Money. Anyways, the point is that that is an example of conglomerate integration where you are in multiple different industries across different sectors, yeah? Okay, right. So if I now demerge that firm, the way I deal with that question is I kind of go to myself, all right, what would be the good things about a merger? And then what are the bad things? Because the good things will now become the eval, and the bad things will become the analysis. Okay, one of the bad things. Do you guys agree that one of the bad things is that they're going to probably experience diseconomies of scale? They're such a big firm. They're operating in so many different industries, managing that many staff in that many industries. Realistically, their costs are likely to be very high. Okay. If they therefore reduce their costs by demerging and specializing in certain industries they're doing really well in, what happens? Let's draw it. It's a very basic diagram, but it actually explains the concept, I think, quite well. So if I draw it over here, so costs. Again, those of you that are joining late on TikTok, it's a good idea to be on YouTube because you can see me drawing. Right, here is the AC curve for this firm, yeah? And we're going to assume that they are initially operating over here, Q1, where this cost is all the way up there at C1. Well, if they demerge, do you guys agree that they are now a smaller firm? They basically now focus on a few, core industries, maybe 3 or 4, whatever industries it is. Again, use the data because it will tell you what they were kind of, selling off. And therefore, you now operate somewhere over here, Q2. And the cost is somewhere down there at C2. Just a point of clarification, by the way, it's really important to understand that this is not economies of scale. Economies of scale has to have 2 criteria. So yes, costs go down, so that cost went down. But the second criteria is that output must be rising. Well, output's not rising here. What this therefore is just less diseconomies of scale. But which efficiency is this? Or do you guys agree that the lowest point of the AC curve, the MES, we're dealing with productive? So my first analysis would be one likely effect of the demerger of the conglomerate is a rise in productive efficiency. I explained. Bigger firm, diseconomies of scale, too big to manage, break it up, focus on your core businesses, operate at a lower point on the output level on the x-axis, C2, productive efficiency rises. Beautiful. What a great analysis, yeah? So evaluate it. Okay, easy. If I were doing this the other way around, by the way, my analysis would have been, oh, one of the benefits of a merger is economies of scale. All right, evaluation now is they're demerging, therefore they can't tap into the same level of economies of scale. Now, normally, I would want you guys to explain it in regards to like purchasing economies of scale. Here, though, I don't think it's a good idea because purchasing, like, if you're bulk buying and you're in different industries, the things you're bulk buying might be very different. The best one is financial. What is financial economies of scale? Financial economies of scale is explained by the following. So imagine that I tomorrow walk into the bank and I ask for, or let's say on Monday, I walk into the bank and I ask for a loan. Let's say specifically, I ask for £1 million. Yeah, I go into the bank and I'm like, hi guys, it's me. Can I get a £1 million loan? Am I going to get a £1 million loan? The answer is such a definitive no, but let's say they were crazy. Let's say the bank has just lost its mind and they decide to give me a loan of £1 million. Would the interest on that loan be high or low? Well, the interest would be high because I would be seen as high risk. Therefore, the cost of basically paying back that loan is pretty high. Imagine the moment that I leave the bank, lo and behold, who walks in with his shiny, glorious head? It is Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos walks into the bank and goes, on behalf of Amazon, we would like a £1 million loan. Are Amazon and Jeff Bezos going to get a £1 million loan? Of course they are. And is the interest on that loan likely to be high or low? It's going to be very low. Do you know why? Because you know you're going to get your money back as back as a bank, and you want them to take out the loan with your bank and not your rival bank. You might as well make some interest on that loan rather than nothing. Therefore, again, big firms benefit by the fact that not only do they take out bigger loans, the interest on the loans are a lot lower. Yeah? Okay. And the other benefit that you had when you were in a conglomerate integration is that you were diversified. If there was a downturn in one industry, it's all good because it's okay. You can basically cross-subsidize from another industry. And I actually illustrate that concept. I know we're kind of going on a tangent a little bit, but very quickly. If I had a question about the benefits of a conglomerate integration, diversification is number one by miles, which is that you are now in various different industries so that if there's a downturn in one, it's okay because you can cross-subsidize from other industries that are doing really well. Let me explain. In the COVID-19 pandemic, do you guys agree that Virgin Atlantic, so their airlines, they would have seen a significant decline in demand? Now, if they were exclusively an airline company, they would have really struggled to the point where they might have shut down. Thomas Cook, Monarch, examples of firms that shut down because of the pandemic. Yeah? Okay. But although they would have seen a significant decline in the number of people going on their planes because of restrictions, which industry do you think did really well for Virgin during the pandemic? Well, Virgin Media. Virgin Media, by the way, is their internet and their like TV service. Think about it. Everyone was in lockdown. You were either working from home or you were getting like homeschooled or whatever. You needed a faster internet connection. Virgin have pretty good internet connection. And you needed basically like a better TV network or like, to entertain yourself, watch like TV shows. Therefore, you'd be like, hey, look, even though the demand for Virgin Atlantic went down, the demand for Virgin Media would have potentially gone up, therefore offsetting that loss. They cross-subsidized. And now the benefit of them surviving, by the way, is that just by surviving, they end up with more market share. Because the other firms that did not survive, that could not cross-subsidize, those businesses closed down. They shut down. But Virgin Atlantic remained in the market. Anyways, going back to this point here, the reason why you basically can talk about economies of scale and specifically financial economies of scale is because with financial economies of scale, now that you are less diversified, you are seen as riskier. The bank may not be willing to give you as big a loan, and the interest on that loan is likely to be a lot higher than it would have been when you were a merged firm and diversified. Cool. That's the first half of the essay. So one, productive efficiency goes up as analysis, productive efficiency goes down as evaluation. Second analysis, I should do it here actually, so number one, dynamic efficiency. Dynamic efficiency is likely to go up. All right, let's talk about why. First, dynamic efficiency requires you to have more profits to be able to invest into like new innovations and technology and things like that, right? Okay. Well, think about which industries would I be demerging from? Which ones would I be selling? Obviously, the loss-making ones. So the first thing is they're going to let go of the loss-making arm of the business. So imagine again, if I do Virgin Atlantic versus Virgin Media to like just get you guys to understand it with, yeah? If Virgin Atlantic are making losses, yeah, and consistently making losses, and Virgin Media keep cross-subsidizing, yeah, the thing is that Virgin Media, those profits could have been invested into like improving that service and improving the technology they use for it, yeah. But because of the fact that they keep cross-subsidizing, it means that they have less profits in that industry. Okay, fine, I sell off the loss-making arm of the business. So I sell off Virgin Atlantic or whatever example they give you in the extract, yeah? The profits that are generated by Virgin Media could be kept in Virgin Media. And if that's the case, then they can invest it and they could innovate and dynamic efficiency rises. The second thing that you can do, so 15 market, bit of depth is not a bad idea. The second thing that I could basically talk about here is the fact that, you know, when you sell one of your businesses, you guys agree that when I sell some of my businesses, I make money. Therefore, that money could also be used now to invest into the industries that I'm still in. And again, it results in dynamic efficiency going up. Clear? That is the analysis. Let's deal with the evaluation. The evaluation, I think personally, what you could talk about is the fact that actually dynamic efficiency could fall. And the reason why is because now they are not as diversified, they might become more risk averse. They might not actually invest into like new innovations, because if it doesn't work, they don't have another industry that they can cross-subsidize from. The other thing is that they might have sold a firm that was just temporarily declining, like in terms of, you know, profits may have just temporarily gone down. Maybe the whole industry was suffering, but actually, had they held on to it, the demand for that industry may potentially have gone back up again and they would have been profit making again. So I imagine, for example, if you decided, oh, you know what, during lockdown, I'm going to sell my airline company. It's probably a bad idea because, of course, yes, at that time, your profits were going down, but it was because of the pandemic that it was going down. And eventually, once normality resumed, profits would have gone back up. And therefore, you know, it would have been a good idea to hold on to that business. And you could have used that to innovate and invest and be more dynamically efficient. And that is the answer. That is the, yeah, is that cool? Right. Those of you that are writing in the chat, by the way, on YouTube, I mean, I'm looking here and there, kind of ignoring you guys. By the way, in advance, you guys have sent these questions in, or I think that these are relevant questions for you guys to know how to answer. And it's more to prepare you as thoroughly as possible for a range of different topics, so that hopefully you absolutely smash this on Monday, yeah? All right, let's deal with externalities. Now, there's a few things about externalities that I need to do before we start revising it. Firstly, in terms of Edexcel, I know and I appreciate that technically speaking, there should be 4 externality diagrams. There should be negative consumption, negative production, positive consumption. However, for some reason, Edexcel dumb it down, and you only need to know 2. You only need to know negative as a production externality, even if you're dealing with it as a consumption. I know that's really illogical. Bear in mind, you can totally draw a negative consumption if you've been taught that and know how to draw that. By all means, go for it. Examiners will know that. They'll credit it. They're not going to penalize you for it. But you can just do negative production all the time. That's the first thing. And positive is always going to be consumption. So I want to take you through, firstly, a systematic way of drawing the diagrams, fixing the market failure, and then we're going to wrap it up with a horrendous question that they asked in 2021. Let's start with the basics. So let's go here. You should all know that an externality is a spillover effect arising from a private transaction. What does that mean? So for example, if someone smokes a cigarette, do you guys agree that that person who's smoking a cigarette, it's obviously bad for their lungs, it's bad for their health, but there is also a spillover effect to society. If someone walks past, they passively smoke, there's more cost for the NHS, etc., etc., etc. Right? So I'm gonna have cost/benefits over here. Right. Again, I have a video on this if you want to revise properly, but externalities. But in essence, you ask yourself the following. You go, negative externality, is that to do with costs or benefits? Well, negative, the word negative is a bit of a giveaway. It is to do with costs. So I'm going to draw 2 slightly pivoted, upward sloping curves like this. Yeah. By the way, those of you that are on TikTok, I know my mic for my phone is kind of playing up a little bit, has been for the last couple of days. So it's a very good idea for you guys to go onto YouTube because it will A, be clearer, but B, you can actually watch me draw all of this. But anyways, so negative externality, we're dealing with 2 cost curves that I draw slightly pivoted like this. I am not going to label them just yet. I will in a minute, yeah? The next thing we do is that we know that there must only be 1 downward sloping curve. Here we are, and we can label that line. Now, every single externality is going to always have 2 players. There is the private party, so the person that does the thing that causes the externality, and then everyone else is society, social, which I'll talk about properly in a second, but we're going to go marginal, private, and you should know that downward sloping lines of benefits is equal to marginal, again, social benefits. Okay, once you've done that, Can you see there are 2 points where they intersect? There and there. Dot down from the 2 points of intersection. And then, very important to understand, a negative externality is always where we are doing too much of a bad thing. And a positive externality is where we are doing too little of a good thing. Just to clarify, by the way, it's still bad that we're doing too little of a good thing, so hence why it's still a market failure, yeah? All right, so here, negative externality, we're basically saying there's too much of a bad thing being done. Which quantity, therefore, must be the equilibrium? Is it this one, number one, or is it this one, number two? Obviously, if I'm doing too much, this must be the equilibrium. So this is QE. This, I'm going to label that as SO to represent social optimum. And this is PE, and this is PSO. Okay, what I now know is I know for a fact that that point there is the equilibrium. 100% that is the equilibrium. Market equilibrium in any externality diagram will always be where marginal private cost, which is your supply curve, by the way, is equal to marginal private benefit, which is your demand curve. In other words, this line must be MPC. The only way for that point to be equilibrium is that must be private. It has to be. Therefore, the other line must be social. So this is MSC. And then you put your pen on the equilibrium, draw a straight line up, and this is the welfare loss triangle. Yeah, so this is welfare loss. Okay. Let's do a few things on this diagram before we start dealing with like positive externalities, yeah? So first things first. What we're showing on this diagram is that there is an overproduction or consumption of this good. So too many people drive petrol cars, diesel cars, etc., etc. Yeah? Anyways, now, if I got a question about how I would fix this, so this is what we call a demerit good, right? How do I fix it? Well, anything that is overproduced in the market, I want to tax it. So either I now draw a tax on top of this, and I'm going to show you how that will work, or I basically draw a pollution permit. If I got like a pollution permits question, again, it's been a while since they asked that in terms of a big question, could easily be asked. Pollution permits is like a contract issued by the government which allows a firm to pollute up to a certain level. Yeah, if they basically pollute above that level, they get fined. What does that do to their cost of production? Well, it increases it. It's like a tax then, yeah? Okay, so let's deal with it. If I'm going to tax it, if I drew a simple supply and demand diagram over here, supply S1 really quickly, D1. Hopefully you should all know that an indirect tax causes supply to shift inwards from S1 to S2, causes the price to go up. Okay, well, what is the supply curve on the diagram above? The supply curve on the diagram above is MPC. Marginal private cost is supply. Therefore, MPC will shift inwards. And I want to shift it right through this point. So we eliminate the market failure. So we're going to go something like that. Yeah, let's pretend that's a straight line. That's going to be MPC plus tax. And the way you can explain this, by the way, is you go, the effect of the tax is to internalize the external costs associated with whatever it is that the extract's about. Example, by the way, last year's paper, 2024, had a 15 marker about government intervention to deal with the issues of, it was like what's it called, electronic devices, and like how they dispose of electronic devices and how bad that was for the environment. Tax it. Tax the products that are highly pollutant. Draw that diagram, explain it. Happy days for you, yeah? So that's our first analysis, yeah? Or that's the first way that I wanted to basically understand it in terms of a diagram. Let's go back and let's deal with a disgusting question. And that disgusting question was asked during COVID. Like I said, the COVID year papers are just abnormally difficult for some reason. The 8 marker, in fact, you know what, I'll throw it to you guys, and then I'll come back to this in a second. The 8 marker that caused a lot of issues looked like the following. So if I go to, this here. Nice, we're already on the paper. Okay, right. It says the following. Examine the likely impact of Thomas Cook's plan to reduce their airline emissions. On the social optimum position, that is a clue, by the way, that this is an unusual question. They have never asked about the social optimum position as a big question. They asked it in the June 2016 paper as an AS, like just 1 marker, but never ever as like a data response question. Use an appropriate externalities diagram in your answer. Okay, to just give you context in case you've not read the extract basically said that Thomas Cook was switching to like more environmentally friendly engines, okay? So I'm gonna go back to my screen over here. All right, so if I look at my screen over here, this is the diagram that I wanna draw because obviously the airline industry is highly pollutant. And so Thomas Cook, when they send out their planes, is obviously gonna lead to negative external costs, okay? Now, normally we'd be fixing it by taxing, but there's no tax here. There's no implication that there's a tax placed or that the costs have gone up for Thomas Cook. The only thing we know is the engines they're using are more environmentally friendly. Okay, let's work out what marginal social cost actually means. So marginal social cost, the cost to society. Do you guys agree there are two parts to marginal social cost? The first is marginal private cost. Think about why. So if I go back to the example of a smoker, do you guys agree that the smoker, there is a cost to them in terms of their lungs, the monetary cost of buying the cigarettes, etc., etc.? They are also part of society, though. You're not banishing them. Therefore, marginal private cost is part of marginal social cost. But there is something else. When someone goes and smokes a cigarette or drives a diesel car or Thomas Cook send their plane into the sky, do you guys agree that there are external costs? There are external costs that the free market doesn't account for, hence why there's market failure, yeah? So there is marginal external cost, MEC. Okay, what does that mean? If I now look at that formula and I consider the question is saying, hey, Thomas Cook are switching to engines that are more environmentally friendly. If that is the case, do you guys agree the external cost of their airline is going down? The same flight, let's say going from here to New York, is going to emit less pollution. Therefore, there is less external cost. And if there is less external cost, MEC falling means MSC is falling. That is why MSC was shifting in that question. I know that's really weird, yeah? So let's just do one thing before I depict it on my diagram. Because of the fact that, this is the weirdest question. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah, right. I'm going to label my welfare loss triangle to begin with in letters. So I'm going to do A, B, and this is C, yeah? Okay, right. Now what happens is the first time ever, Edexcel have ever asked this, marginal social cost is falling, yeah? So this is going to be MSC1, and we're going to now draw another marginal social cost curve over here, marginal social cost 2. Now bear in mind, by the way, the equilibrium is still where MPC equals MPB. It will always be the equilibrium. Just to clarify why, by the way, MPC is supply and MPB is demand. Hence, equilibrium is always where supply equals demand. MPC equals MPB. Right, so equilibrium hasn't changed. We're still producing, or they're still sending out this many planes into the sky. However, the social optimum is where social cost equals social benefit. And that's changed. It's now over here. So now that's QSO2. And I'm going to make sense of this in words in a second. It's QSO2, and this is PSO2. And remember how I said that the welfare loss triangle, the way you get it is you put your pen on the equilibrium and you draw a line up to the social cost curve, because that's the external cost. Well, do you guys agree? Here to there. The triangle is now this little thing. It's not now ABC. It used to be ABC. It's now going to be C. Label that as D. Label that as E. Welfare loss has decreased. The logic is the following. So hopefully that made sense, but let's just go through it in terms of logic, because economics, I need it to make sense logically. Right. If I make up numbers, imagine that the number of flights that Thomas Cook send out into the air on a, I don't know, let's say like on a daily basis, is 10 flights. Yeah. So that would be the equilibrium over here. Yeah. But we go, you know what? No, this is really bad for the environment. We don't want you to send out 10 flights. We want you to send out 6 flights. So that was the initial social optimum. In other words, there was an overproduction of 4. Yeah. They did it 4 too many flights. Yeah. Now, because they're switching to better engines or more environmentally friendly engines, do you guys agree that that means that if they send out a plane to the sky, it's not as pollutant? Therefore, we go, do you know what? You can produce 7 now, and then it's not that bad. Society is not as badly affected by it. So there's still therefore an overproduction, by the way, but the overproduction has gone down by 3. It's no longer as big a market failure as it was. That is the marks, by the way. The analysis was just to explain that in words, to basically say that them switching to greener engines results in external costs going down. External costs going down means that MSC shifts outwards or goes down. Draw it, boom. That's it. That's the diagram. Yeah, I appreciate that is weird. Yeah. All right, let's go and deal with positive externalities. Positive externalities. All right. First things first. Positive externality, is that to do with costs or benefits? Well, think about the word. The word positive probably benefits, right? Like good things. So again, upward or downward sloping. Well, it is downward sloping. Why? Because if you think of it this way, your favorite chocolate bar, when you get more and more of your favorite chocolate bar, you get less and less benefit. Okay, so downward sloping lines are like this. Now, just because I'm about to correct it, I'm not going to have them pivoted, because if I pivot it, I could end up missing where I need to go. I will show this in a second. So if there are 2 downward sloping lines, it follows there must only be 1 upward sloping line. Let's label the upward sloping line. The upward sloping line is marginal private cost equals marginal social cost, yeah? And we've got basically 2 points of intersection again. So we dot down and across. Okay, right. Again, positive externality. Are we doing too little or are we doing too much? Well, positive externality is where we are doing too little. For example, June 2023 has an extract about the underconsumption of online resources, education resources, like this, right? Anyways, so basically, at the equilibrium, we're going to show that there is an underconsumption or underproduction. So it's going to be this. This is QE. This is therefore QSO, yeah? And therefore, this is PE, PSO. Right, because this is the equilibrium, do you guys see that point there? The line going through it must be private. Equilibrium always occurs where private cost equals private benefit. Always, 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 always. This is MPB. And this therefore is marginal social benefit. And then I put my pen again on the equilibrium, I draw a straight line up. See this triangle over here? That is the potential welfare gain. Okay, so it's what society could have gained if, for example, more people went to university or more people like healthy fruit and veg, blah, 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 blah. But because they're not, we're not actually getting all these benefits that we could have got. So potential welfare gain. Right. I need water. My throat is killing me. Okay, right. I am going to fix this in a moment. But before I fix it, I want to make you understand how it is fixed. Firstly, remind ourselves again that MPC equals MPB as the equilibrium, because that is supply equals demand. Yeah, remember that's very important for what I'm about to show you. I'm going to draw another diagram underneath it, because by explaining it this way, it hopefully properly makes sense of what a subsidy is and how subsidies typically work. So here we go. Okay, let's assume that this is the market for, I don't know, let's say like bananas or something, yeah? So if I say this is like thousands over here, okay, and this is just standard supply and demand, yeah? And I'm going to make up numbers, by the way, to illustrate this, to make sense of it, so you guys understand this. Okay, let's assume that initially the market price of a single banana in the UK happened to be, I don't know, 65p, yeah? And the number of bananas that are being consumed is 80,000 bananas, okay? Right, so the government look at this, so their scientists look at this and go, no, 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 because bananas are really good for you. It will result in less strain on the NHS. It will lead to worker productivity going up, blah, 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 whatever, right? And they work out that the optimal amount of bananas that we as a society should be consuming is 100,000. So here's 100,000 on the x-axis. Do you agree? Okay. This is what they need to do. In order for them to achieve that outcome level, they need to ask two questions. If they ask two questions and figure out the answer to each, they will know what the appropriate subsidy is to fix this and achieve 100,000 bananas. Question number one. Question number one is they need to ask the consumer, because the consumer needs to want to buy 100,000 bananas. Which curve is the consumer, supply or demand? Would you guys agree that demand is clearly the consumer? So if I go from 100,000 and I hit the demand curve, think about what a demand curve is. The demand curve maps out at different prices how many units people are willing to buy of that good. So if I dot across from there, just make up a number. Let's say consumers go, do you know what? If bananas were 50p, we'll buy 100,000 bananas, happy days. But that is not the only question the government needs to ask, because the government need to incentivize the farmers to make 100,000 bananas. Which curve is the farmer or the producer? Obviously supply. If I therefore go up from 100,000 until I hit the supply curve, is it there? Let's say, hypothetically, they go, if it's 80p, we're down. We'll make 100,000 bananas. This is what the government now do. The government now turn around to them and go, okay, cool. Can you please sell it to the consumers at the price that they can afford? So the 50p. And then we will subsidize you the difference between the price you actually wanted, the 80p, and the 50p the consumer's giving you. In other words, the government, in my made-up example, would subsidize every single banana that they sell 30p. And now you should all know that the supply curve shifts outwards, but I need you to understand where it is shifting to and why it is shifting to that point. Do you guys agree that in order for the market price to become 50p, supply needs to shift right there, where it hits demand at 100,000? Why is that important? The reason why that is extremely important is if I now compare it to the diagram above. Well, do you guys agree in the diagram above, QE over there, the equilibrium, is 80,000 bananas. It's the equilibrium. Do you guys agree that PE is 65p? Yeah? And do you guys agree that what I'm about to do is I'm going to go up from the social optimum, which is clearly 100,000, that's QSO, yeah? until I hit the demand curve. And then I'm going to draw supply right through that point there. Yeah, I mean, let's get it right there. And that's going to be S2. And the new market price is going to be that 50p. Well, what is the demand curve on my diagram above? Well, the demand curve is marginal private benefit. If I therefore want to achieve this outcome, and that's what I want to do, to correct the market failure, I just need to ensure that I am at social optimum. What I do is I go up from QSO till I hit marginal private benefit, because you know why? Because marginal private benefit is the demand curve. In exactly the same way that I went up from 100,000 till I hit the demand curve, I'm now going to go right here. And I'm going to draw the following. Let's pretend that was a straight line. Come back to do again. MPC plus sub to D. But there's one more thing that changes here. Yeah. The last thing that changes is the market price, because the new equilibrium, that's the quantity. So we're now at social optimum. Happy days for us. But the new price is now this, P2. And if I now compare my two diagrams to make sense of what just happened, yeah, PE was 65p. PSO was the price the producer wanted, 80p. And P2 was the 50p the consumers could afford or would be willing to basically pay for 100,000 bananas. And now I corrected the market failure. I know the triangle looks like it's still there, but it's not. The reason why it's not there is because now we are at the social optimum. There is no more welfare gain. We have gained it. We are now correcting the market failure. We fixed it. And that is how to draw that diagram. Yeah? One last diagram, and then I will move on from externalities, and I'm going to do one last topic because I am shattered. Right, the last thing, just get some water. The last thing is, again, a COVID year. It said the following. There's a 25 marker, and 25 marker was about how more and more people were switching from diesel and petrol cars towards electric cars, yeah? Now, my first analysis is very straightforward, by the way, because what I'll be showing is that there's an increase in demand for electric cars, draw a cost and revenue diagram, AR and MR shift outwards, yeah? Go wild. Go and summarize that diagram. It's great for companies like Tesla, BYD. They're going to generate more revenue, more profits. They become more dynamically efficient. Like, just go crazy, yeah? Anyways, that's the first analysis. Let's deal with the second analysis, and I would do it through an externality, and I'd explain that, hey, this is kind of good for the environment, because if more people are switching to electric cars, then the positive externality, the underconsumption of electric cars, we're getting closer to the social optimum. We're starting to fix it. But the diagram is slightly different because, again, let's draw it again. Cost benefit. Right, we know positive externalities is a benefit. So 2 downward sloping lines. 1, 2. Therefore, 1 upward sloping line like that. That's MPC equals MSC. And then we have the 2 points of intersection, dot down, and across, and across. Okay. Again, positive externality. Is it where we do too little or we do too much? Well, we clearly do too little. So this is QE. Not enough people use electric cars. This is the social optimum that we ideally want to be at. This is PE. This is PSO, right? Externalities hopefully is now really straightforward for you because you go, oh, that's equilibrium, is it? Well, the line going through it, there's only one of it going through it. It must be private. This is MPB and this is MSB. Right, and I'm going to do it again in letters because it's going to change in a second. A, B, and that's C. Okay? Right. Now, again, normally, do you guys understand that normally the way you'd fix this, like I just fixed it a second ago, if the government are intervening, they would subsidize, or if the government were intervening in the negative externality, they would place a tax, right? Okay, in this instance, though, there was no government intervention. It was just people were opting to switch from diesel and petrol cars to electric cars. Okay. If that's the case, if I do a very simple supply and demand diagram depicting the effect on electric cars or electric car companies, do you agree demand shifts outwards? What is demand on my diagram? Demand on my diagram is marginal private benefits. That. And I'm just going to shift it outwards. So I'm going to do something like this. Just get it straighter. That's MPB2. Equilibrium has changed because the equilibrium is now there, where MPC equals MPB is now here. So we're now at Q2. The price is here. Just squeeze it in. That's P2. And finally, by the way, remember that the welfare gain triangle or the potential welfare gain triangle is always place your pen on the equilibrium and draw a straight line up. So if I put my pen on the equilibrium, it's now here, and here's my straight line up. So I now A, D, E, yeah? By the way, one of the things I want you guys to do for your exam on Monday is make sure that your diagrams are big diagrams, yeah? I want massive diagrams for easier. It's just easier for the examiners to be able to understand what you're doing compared to, especially like this. Look at how much is happening on my diagram. and cost and revenue diagrams in particular, when they shift, I want it to basically be like really clear for them to see. Yeah. Okay. Right. So all that we can now showed is that we're getting closer to social optimum, and so we're close to correcting the market failure. The welfare gain triangle, the potential welfare gain, has gone from ABC to ADE. Is that clear? And that hopefully gives you a really nice overview of externalities, how to deal with externalities, how to basically answer questions on it. One thing, by the way, and I began this with the labor market as well. I personally think that externalities as a 12 or a 15, 10, easy peasy, lovely, really easy. Because you just basically go through like the private cost or external costs and just illustrate what they are, draw the negative externality, illustrate that it's overproduced. I do not think it's a good choice for a 25 market. And the reason why I don't think it's a good choice for a 25 market, especially if it's a negative externality, is because developing the paragraph about private cost in meaningful detail is not easy. June 2018, they had a question about Hinkley Point, the nuclear power point, and it was about private and external costs of doing that. Other than listing, the private cost of like the land required and the materials and the staff that you have to pay, like what can you say? There's not much theory behind that. So I would actually avoid externalities as a 25 marker. Now watch how they give you a choice of externalities and labor market to just spite me. But anyways, regardless, like I just think that in terms of getting it into the top level and being able to develop it in meaningful detail, there's not that much to say, I think. Yeah, so I wouldn't really go down that route. Cool. Right. Last topic, and then I will let you guys go to sleep and I will breathe again. The last topic that I want to go through is a topic that hasn't been examined for a long time. It is government failure. Before I discuss what government failure is, allow me to just take you through one of the best extracts, I think, or I'll show you a question. And it's from the old spec. It's June 2014, Unit 1, question 10E. All right, let's go. Unit 1. Right. Some water. Okay, so Unit 1. Right. June 2014. I am exhausted, by the way, but we'll wrap up pretty soon. I'm sure you guys are very tired as well. I apologize for how long this is. Just wanted to cover as much as I could before your exam to give you the best chance of getting a really good grade. Okay, so these have two choices. This is question 10. Okay. This is the question. It says, with reference to the information provided and your own knowledge, which is vast, to what extent might regulations on the sale of cigarettes and high taxes on tobacco result in government failure? Okay, let's deal with government failure. What is government failure? Do not confuse government failure for market failure. Market failure is where the free market fails to allocate resources efficiently. So there's a misallocation of resources, like externalities is an example of market failure. The free rider problem leading to the under-provision of public goods, which, by the way, is a positive externality. That's market failure. But anyways, government failure is where the government intervene to try and fix a market failure, but they either create another issue, like an unintended consequence, or they make the situation worse. Yeah, that is government failure. So the definition, the formal definition I want you to write down in the exam is government failure occurs when government intervention results in a net welfare loss compared to the free market solution. Fancy, fancy. That's all it means, what I just described earlier. Okay, these are your go-to things to look for. I want you to always, if it's like a tax, or if you have the choice of saying like a 25 marker, one way that government failure could arise is the government taxing, let's say, tobacco. Well, the first thing that happens when you tax tobacco is that it might encourage people to turn to the hidden economy. They might basically start smuggling cigarettes. Lo and behold, extract 3, tobacco smuggling and government regulation. Lovely. Okay. One reason why government failure may have occurred is due to the fact that people are now smuggling. And it literally says it in the data. It says high tobacco taxes are blamed for creating the illegal trade. The government lose more than £2 billion a year in potential tax revenue. This is all real world knowledge for you, by the way. You guys know that the extracts are all factual information. It's not made up. And it's all obviously relevant to you because they're asking questions in your spec about it. Anyways, first analysis, people turning to the hidden economy. Now, there's two problems with the hidden economy. One is the government lose out on tax revenue that they could have used to invest into the NHS, into whatever, right? As in to basically fix this market failure. But number two, do you agree that products that are illegally smuggled are not regulated? And therefore, those products may be even more harmful for your lungs than a normal cigarette is. And you can quote the following, often consist of even more harmful chemical compounds. First analysis. That is government failure. You go, hey, that's government failure. Yeah? So evaluate. Right, now, I want you guys in the exam to evaluate using the word however. It's a very easy word to use, but it's a good way to let the examiner know. You leave a line, you go, oh, however, yeah? And the reason why I love the word however is because Edexcel also love the word however. And often the extract will give you clues when you read the word however. Oh, hello, there's however right there. However, some of the highest levels of smuggling were found in Spain and Italy, two countries with the lowest tax rates on tobacco. Okay, in other words, is there a correlation between taxes and smuggling? Maybe not. In other words, the evaluation is to kind of defend the government and be like, well, actually, smuggling is likely to happen regardless of the government intervention. That smuggling occurs even more kind of common in Spain and Italy, even though they have even lower taxes. Therefore, you go, ain't really the government's fault, is it? That's not government failure then. It just is, it will happen regardless of the government intervention. That is our first analysis and first evaluation. Drop my pen. Number two, second thing that we can talk about, taxes are always, indirect taxes, taxes on goods and services, which is all you need to know for theme one, by the way, or micro, are always regressive. What does that mean? Regressive taxation means that it impacts low-income households more than high-income households. A great evaluation, by the way, for a tax question as well. What it means is, if I say, let's say there's a pack of, let's say the tax on cigarettes is £5. £5 for someone who is a multi-millionaire. Do you agree that £5 for a multi-millionaire, or Alpha in the chat who keeps gifting me money, thank you very much, is like a drop in the ocean? They're like, it's £5, nothing, yeah? Basically, it doesn't account for a large proportion of high-income households' expenditure, but £5 for someone on minimum wage. That's basically half an hour of their salary. That is a much larger proportion of their income, agreed? As a result, then, it's going to widen income inequality. And the way I can develop it, again, is the extract can help. But I know my points. I just need the extract to support it rather than getting my points from the extract. Well, look at this. It basically says in extract 2 that smoking remains higher for low-income workers in manual occupations, 29%, compared to higher income workers in professional and managerial occupations. The point then is simple. The point is it's regressive. It worsens income inequality. And to make matters worse, low-income households are more addicted to cigarettes. Therefore, this is going to be bad for income inequality. It is government failure. Cool. I'll deal with the evaluations in a second. Third analysis, or third thing that you can do, obviously you don't do third analysis in the exam. It's just to cover everything and make sure you guys understand. The last thing is something called unintended consequences. Unintended consequences simply means the government intervened and it results in other problems arising. So if I look at, for example, January 2013, Unit 1, hold on. January 2013, Unit 1 has an extract about, in fact, I'll quickly show you guys. So it was about, what's it called? Pollution permits, yeah? So let me actually show you with an example. So there's an extract, number 10. Here we are. And the question is about, here you go. Assess, so D, with reference to extract 2 and your own knowledge, assess the benefits of a system of tradable pollution permits for reducing carbon emissions. Right. The reason I'm showing you guys is this is clearly, by the way, an example of government intervention. Yeah, the government are intervening by imposing that scheme. Any unintended consequence will be an evaluation, and it will always be government failure. So in our government failure essay, it's analysis. It says this. It goes, it's expected to lead to 40,000 jobs directly at risk and a further 100,000 indirectly. In other words, when the government intervene by placing a tax or by placing pollution permits, it increases the cost of production for the firms. And if their cost of production go up, some of them might even shut down. You can even draw that, by the way, on a cost and revenue diagram to illustrate their variable costs go up, MC and AC rise, show them now making a loss. That firm may end up shutting down. That is government failure because it leads to job losses. Clear? That's our analysis. Now, in terms of the extract that I was dealing with, here you go. The last sentence says this. It goes, a government smoking ban imposed on enclosed public spaces since 2007 has coincided with more than 1,500 pubs and bars closing down each year. That is government failure, unintended consequence. I'll just wrap up with one thing, which is another evaluation that you could talk about is to say, wait, does the government need to intervene here? And is the intervention working? Well, let's look. If I look at extract 2, or figure 2, sorry. Figure 2 shows the estimated costs of tobacco smoking in Britain. The total, by the way, is £13.7 billion. The one that's mad for me is this one. Loss of productivity from smoking breaks at work, £2.9 billion a year. It's mad. Anyways, point is, anyone know, or can you recognize what that £13.7 billion means? What is that? What is that £13.7 billion? That £13.7 billion are the external costs. Yeah? That is the external costs of them people smoking. Is that a small market failure or a pretty big market failure? Go, oh my Lord, this is some crazy market failure. The government need to, they can't leave it. They can't be like, oh, fine, let's leave it. They have to intervene. And then if we look at figure one shows the percentage of smokers between 1974 and 2010. It has gone down from around 45% to 20%. Right? Sorry, I forgot to scroll up. Yeah, 45%, 20%. In other words, is it working? Well, yeah, it's working. The government intervention clearly is resulting in less smokers, and therefore the evaluation is, however, the government intervention in the tobacco market is both necessary and effective. Necessary because the external cost in figure 2 is enormous, and working because the percentage of smokers has gone down from 45% in 1974 to 20% in 2010. You could talk about how the tax internalizes the external cost, draw a negative externality diagram, shift MPC inwards like we did earlier, explain the diagram, happy days. You can also talk about how the government generate more revenue and they can hypothecate that revenue. Fancy way of saying that they could use that tax revenue, spend it back on the original market failure. Okay, I said this was the last thing, but I just want to do one more thing, and then I promise I'll let you go. Yeah? I just want to do one last thing, which is regulation. Yeah? Can I just whiz through just a quick overview of regulation and explain a few things about regulation in case they ask a question about it? A couple of months ago, the regulator in the USA announced that Google, they argued, were too big. They're like, too big, you need to demerge. Yeah? If I get an extract about the impact of a demerger, I mean, we already kind of dealt with it earlier with efficiencies. But in respect to why this might increase, might be good for consumers. A demerger results in consumers getting more choice. A demerger results in lower prices because now those firms are competing against each other. This results in higher levels of allocative efficiency. A demerger should actually result in higher quality because firms, to compete and get you to basically buy their product and not the other firm, need to improve their quality. Cool? That is the analysis. These are all the good things about a demerger. The evaluation to that is actually more competition may be bad because more competition may mean lower profits. Lower profits means less investment, less dynamic efficiency, quality of what the consumers get might be worse. Yeah, right. Second thing in terms of a regulator is they might fine a firm. Let's say they've done something dodgy. I don't know, they've predatory pricing or whatever. Yeah. Okay, if I were to draw that on a diagram, well, one of the things that you could talk about is that a fine is a fixed cost because it's a one-off, right? So you draw a cost summary diagram and you shift AC upwards. I'm too tired to draw it. You guys don't totally can draw that though, yeah? What you'll notice, by the way, is the price doesn't change, the output doesn't change, the cost will go up though, and the profits therefore will go down. Okay, less profits. First things first, if you fine a firm, do you guys agree the reputational damage that is incurred for that firm now makes the market more contestable? Why? Because now people might be open to switching to another firm. Your brand loyalty is starting to waver. There's an opportunity for new firms to enter the market. And therefore, the existing firms may have to actually start reducing their prices. They might need to limit price, yeah? Anyways, that could be one of the effects of a fine. The other thing is that if the fine is imposed, that firm doesn't have as much to innovate with. Therefore, the quality of their goods might start to go down. And again, that represents a new opportunity for a new firm to enter. Therefore, once again, you might end up with the market becoming more contestable and lower prices. Evaluation to that, it depends. Brand loyalty might be really high. And if there's really strong brand loyalty or people exhibit habitual behavior, realistically, the barriers to entry in the market still remain really high. The firm doesn't really need to they might need to sort of kind of reduce their investment temporarily, but it's not the end of the world, yeah? So it's not that big a deal. Is that clear? That would be like a potential evaluation for that kind of question, yeah? This is all, by the way, going to be recorded and uploaded onto YouTube, so you guys can go watch this back and pause it and watch it a million times, so don't worry, yeah? The very last thing in terms of regulation that I want to quickly talk about is that if you get a question about regulation, another thing that you can always mention as an evaluation is regulatory capture. Regulatory capture is where the regulator and the regulated firm develop a close relationship, which results in the firm being leniently treated. In other words, rather than really scrutinizing their work and making sure that you're being the best regulator possible, it might actually be really lenient. It might set, for example, when it comes to the price cap, a really easy price cap to achieve. If they, for example, set them performance targets, the performance target may not be that hard to achieve, etc., etc. The fines they hand out to them may potentially be pretty low. And that means that you will hopefully smash a question on regulation as well. Guys, I am honestly shattered. Yeah, I'm sure you guys are as well. Very well done for coming along to this. Hopefully this was helpful. I will see you guys for the next live. It will be announced in the next couple of days on our social media channels. So check out for that. It will be for paper 2. In the meantime, I wish you all the best of luck on Monday. I hope you guys do amazingly well. whatever they ask in the exam, I need you guys to remain really calm. If you haven't watched my Section B walkthrough, by the way, please make sure you do. It goes through the technique of how to deal with Section B. I've done business objectives as well on Section A questions on YouTube as well. And yeah, good luck. I hope you guys do amazingly well.